Good evening. If everybody could take their seats, please. Welcome to Gender 101, a crash course for parents, grandparents, and citizens on gender ideology. We are so glad you're here tonight to learn about this critical issue facing our children in the classroom. And as you can see from our agenda, it's pretty straightforward. So we'll get started right away with an opening prayer by Kathy Harms.
If you could just bow your heads for a minute here and let's take this to the Lord. Father God, we just thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to come together to elevate this subject matter that is important in order to protect future generations of children, Lord God, that are being indoctrinated in the schools. We thank you that there is nothing new under the sun. We thank you for your word that goes back to the garden that tells us, and God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them. And I thank you for that, Lord, that even though that is the truth, back in the garden, there was also a voice that says, has God really said? And we come together here tonight, Father, for those that have been taken captive by the deceit and philosophies of men, Father, that have been so deceived, Lord, that they have exchanged the truth that you have for your creation and the beauty of your creation for a lie. So God, we ask that as we come together this evening to learn, to be instructed, that we leave here, Father, with our minds renewed in all things of you, Father, that we would grow in your grace and in your wisdom, and that we would leave here tonight equipped to speak with the hope for the defense that's in us, Lord, that we would be able to speak clearly and succinctly to the culture, Father, that has gone astray, that has exchanged that truth for a lie, because we have something better here to present tonight. And that's the beauty of your creation. And we ask, God, that you would bless the speakers, be with them, Father, and bring everyone that has come to this meeting home safely. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Kathy. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Robin Steenman. I'm the chair of the Moms for Liberty Williamson County chapter. I'm an Air Force veteran. I flew the B-1 bomber while active duty. I'm a wife to my husband for 12 years. I'm the mom to 3 beautiful children aged 8, 5, and 2. And I feel called into service once again for the children of our country as we work to inform, equip, and empower them. We started this chapter in April 2021, so 1 year and 8 months later, here we are. We're still equipping and empowering parents on the critical issues facing their children. So Gender 101 is part of our 2022-23 school year for parents. We've already covered critical race theory in September, social emotional learning in October, and this month our focus is gender ideology, which causes not only psychological harm, but can also lead to irreversible damage of our children. I want to say up front that none of tonight is a commentary on individual sexuality or right or wrong. We're not even going there. These are choices that adults make, ideally in the privacy of their own homes. Our issue is with the targeting of children with this ideology and the catastrophic effects it can have on their minds and their bodies and their families. So in the month of November, as we focus on gender ideology, what can you expect from our chapter? We are currently reading Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier in our book club. We are doing Gender 101 tonight. We have Gender 102 as a follow-on this Thursday. We hope you'll tune in for that. It's over Zoom. We will have, by the end of the month, a gender ideology true-false quiz for parents so you can test what you've learned. And then we'll also be building this whole time a gender ideology toolkit on our website. And by the end of the month, we'll render an assessment of where we feel Williamson County Schools is on this ideology. So, did you ever think 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, that the statements on this slide would be commonplace? So gender is a spectrum. Gender is a social construct. I did an internet search for how many gender identities are there, because it's changing all the time. In one night alone, I found 37, 64, 81, 100 plus, and infinite. There is more than I can list than I had space for on the slide, but non-binary, transgender, agender, bigender, gender fluid, gender queer, pangender, polygender, intergender, and so on, gender non-conforming. But then if you start going around on the internet, you'll also find furries, frogs, and people identifying with demon pronouns. So this is a rabbit hole that just has no end right now, and it's normalizing our culture to start to accept it. Even Trudeau can't do the 2S LGBTQIA+, because now we're into two spirits. Today, men can get pregnant. Men have abortion rights. Men deserve equal access to tampons and bathrooms. The language is changing. Birthing people, bleeders, that's attractive. Chest feeding. And then they don't say mom or dad anymore. Do you notice that? Our schools, it's caregiver. It's caregiver or parents, because they don't want gendered language. So, and not only do we have to deal with pronouns, but I'll show you in a slide later on that now there's neo-pronouns. So it just keeps getting ever more complex. And a lot of the things on that slide will make you chuckle a little bit at the sheer outrageousness and insanity of it. But with the gender ideology on that outcomes on this slide, it's far more deadly serious, because we have men, biological boys, competing against our girls in sports. That is a travesty. That is backwards in women's rights. We have biological men going into women's spaces. There are known rapists that will suddenly identify as a woman to be put into a woman's prison, and the prison system will go along with it. There are real consequences to that. Parents are largely vilified as the enemy. We're called the gatekeepers. We're keeping transgender or gender-affirming care from our kids. So the entire culture has become hostile to parents, which is destructive to the family. Sound medicine and psychology have been utterly abandoned. And doctors and psychologists and even transgender clinic directors who have spoken in favor of more sound approaches to treating children with gender dysphoria, they've had their clinics shut down or just been completely kicked out and silenced. So we have children undergoing elective double mastectomies, castrations, phalloplasty. Now, if you want to hear about something truly harrowing, do an internet search on what exactly a child has to go through, or anyone, to do phalloplasty and the possible long-term effects of it. Puberty blockers, hormone therapies for minors. Glitter families replace biological families, so it's the destruction of the family. Gender dysphoria in girls, 3 years ago, was up over 4,000%. And most likely, the numbers equate to that here in the United States, but our tracking is just not as good, so it's harder to prove. It's at least 1,000, but probably more in the range of 4,000. And teen suicide is way up. I've heard anywhere from 19 to 40%. So it begs the question, what are we doing to our children? And who's going to stand up for them? How do we make sense of all of this? Well, that's the whole point of Gender 101, the crash course for parents, because it's a lot to sort out. And we are so proud to bring you two amazing keynote speakers tonight, and they're going to be a treat to listen to. Billboard Chris, aka Chris Elston, is a father of 2 girls from Vancouver, Canada, who has been traveling North America since 2020, having street conversations, generating media and reaching millions of people about the dangers of gender ideology, specifically the practice of giving children harmful puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries. So, I would like you to join me in giving Chris Elston a warm welcome to the stage in Williamson County.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good to see you all. I got in town yesterday from Vancouver, BC, and I guess I should tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm basically your average nobody who is just living a normal life, like all of us, in the suburbs of Vancouver, BC. And in 2019, I started learning about all this child abuse going on, this gender stuff. Where I'm from, Canada, this newly minted communist country, things are totally out of control. Not one conservative politician will speak out about any of this stuff. So it's been completely suppressed in the media, and that's how they've had so much success in spreading this. But some people I followed on Twitter were talking about this, and so I started to dig in because I'm a dad of 2 girls. And they are right now 10 and almost 13 years old, so they're right in that age where all these girls are being affected by this ideology, coming to believe that they're really boys on the inside, whatever that means. And I see this as a cult that has permeated all of society, so I wanted to learn all about it. And the thing about this is, the more you learn about it, the worse it gets. And I'm getting up there in years. I'm almost 47, and the only purpose I live is for my kids, like all of us as parents. Our lives and our priorities change, and it becomes about leaving a good legacy for them and setting them up to succeed. And this world's gone so insane that the more I learned, I just couldn't stay quiet about it. So what happened in July of 2020 was a woman in the UK named Posey Parker put up a very controversial sign. It said, "I love J.K. Rowling," the Harry Potter author. I heart J.K. Rowling. It had a big heart on it. She put this sign up at the Edinburgh train station. It lasted one day because some people on Twitter complained that it was hate speech, and the government-run train authority took it down. So I'm a believer in freedom of speech, and I think with the most controversial subjects of all, those are the ones we should really be able to talk about. And I'll get into what's happening to these kids in a minute, but when you have something affecting our children's physical health for the rest of their lives, this is one issue that we should be able to have a civil conversation about more than anything. And these activists keep trying to censor our speech. So it ticked me off. So I followed her lead, and I put up a big billboard in Vancouver, BC, near downtown, that said the same thing: "I love J.K. Rowling." Just so happens I'd been reading Harry Potter every night for about a year with my little one, who was 8 at the time. So J.K. Rowling was near and dear to my heart, especially at that time, because my favorite part of every day is reading with my kids at night. But I put up this big billboard, it got paint bombed overnight, and then the funny thing is, it didn't really attract much attention. It was up all day, and it didn't attract a lot of attention until I tweeted it out. There was no immediate outrage from all these people seeing this terribly hateful sign. It wasn't until I tweeted it out that all the activists went crazy, and the Vancouver politicians got involved, and this one politician, she said it was hate speech, and she pressured the sign company to take it down, and they did. So I think we've got a slide here of that sign. There it is. So the picture on the left is how it first looked. The picture on the right is the billboard man who they paid overtime to come in on the weekend to take it down. And it was funny because he's up there, up in that boom about 50 feet up in the air from a street down below, and it broke, and he got stuck there for about 45 minutes. I tweeted out, "God, is that you?" But they took it down, and there was a lot of outrage online. This news went viral, and so I leveraged that outrage online into a little fundraising campaign. And I put up billboards in San Francisco the next week, Portland, all throughout Utah, Los Angeles, all throughout the metro in Washington, D.C., and then Times Square, all throughout September of 2020. But then because I couldn't put up a sign in Canada, none of our 2 major sign companies will work with me, I did the only thing I could do as someone without any medium, without any platform, as just a regular dad living in the suburbs. I became a human billboard. And we've got this identity craze going on. Girls identifying as boys, boys identifying as girls. So I decided to identify as something myself. And what I identify as is a dad. And a dad is somebody, it's a human male, speaking biologically, who protects his kids from gender ideology. This is one of the true definitions of being a dad in the year 2022. What's going on today is we have all these children, mostly girls, who are struggling during adolescence, as is common, who are being taught through schools, through social media, and just the culture at large, movies, television shows, everything, it's everywhere, that they have a gender identity. What is a gender identity? If you tell a child that they have a gender identity and that it might not coincide with their sex, well, what's the next thing this child's going to do? You got some blue-haired 22-year-old teacher who just graduated university and just finished her gender studies classes, and she's teaching these 8 and 9-year-olds that they all have a gender identity. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to try to figure out what their gender identity is, right? You've just been told you have something. What is it? What's yours? So if we can bring up this other slide, the genderbread person, please. So this is the most used resource all around the world. Colin's going to talk about it more, so I'm going to cover it just briefly. This is in schools, it's in children's hospitals. They even use this at some children's hospitals to teach their staff about gender identity. So let's examine what it is. If you look at the subheading there, gender identity, it describes it as being based on your personality, your jobs, your hobbies, your likes and dislikes, your roles, presumably in society, and expectations upon you. What are these? These are regressive sexist stereotypes. If a girl wants to be an engineer when she grows up, does that put her on the boy end of the spectrum? If I want to work in the kitchen, does that make me a woman? There's this expression that it's sexist to say that women should do the dishes. Equality teaches that anybody can do the dishes. Well, gender ideology teaches that whoever's doing the dishes is a woman. This is the most regressive, stupid ideology in the history of the world. But it's not just dumb, it's extremely harmful. We are talking about the greatest child abuse scandal in modern medicine history going on right now. You have hundreds of thousands of children, mostly girls, who have come to believe that they're really boys on the inside. Tomboys are not actual boys. How many women here were tomboys growing up? Yeah. How many women loved puberty? Right. Puberty's harder for girls. So it's natural for girls sometimes maybe to want to opt out of their sex. And if you give these kids an option, well, guess what? Some of them will take you up on that option. The kids who are transitioning today, and there's two types of transition I'll get into here. So there's social transition, which we should more accurately call psychological transition. This is when you give a kid a new name, new pronouns. What's that doing to a child? These teachers, these psychologists, these counselors, they are engaging in a psychological intervention with these children when they have no qualifications to do so. They are concretizing in this child's mind this idea that they are something that they're not. And they sell this under the banner of helping a child to be who they really are. All the Democratic politicians push this nonsense that they're just helping these kids to be who they really are by cutting off their breasts, by stopping puberty, by giving them the opposite sex's hormones for the first time in human history, and we have no idea what it's doing long-term to these kids' bodies, by doing what they call bottom surgeries, where they literally carve off the fat, the skin, the blood vessels, the nerves from a girl's forearm and fashion this into a fake phallus, which they then attach. I didn't include pictures of that because it's too gruesome, but you can find them, and it's horrific. And children are being started on this process. We have children's hospitals advertising these processes. They're castrating boys as young as 16 years old, physically. So, just on this subject of stereotypes, I want to get into one little video that I have here, which is from one of the world's leading experts on gender identity. She works at the Boston Children's Hospital, which is the #1 ranked children's hospital in the country. And I never want people to take my word for anything, because who am I? I'm just some cis hetero white male from Canada. What do I know? But this is the expert, so let's see this video here.
A child will often know that they are transgender from the moment that they have any ability to express themselves, and parents will often tell us this. We have parents who tell us that their kids, they knew from the minute they were born practically, and actions like refusing to get a haircut or standing to urinate, trying to stand to urinate, refusing to stand to urinate, trying on siblings' clothing, playing with the quote opposite gender toys, things like that. There is more and more a group of adolescents that we are seeing that really are coming to the realization that they might be trans or gender diverse a little bit later on in their life. So what we're seeing from them is that they always sort of knew something was maybe off and didn't have the understanding to know that they might be trans or have a different gender identity than the one they had been assigned. So that is a growing population that we are seeing, and that's being recognized as being trans and able to be treated.
Able to be treated. We can treat them now for playing with opposite gender toys. Isn't that wonderful? What a progressive society we have. A little girl who tries to pee standing up, a little boy who doesn't want to get a haircut. These are signs your toddler might be trans, everybody. Top expert in the world. This is being pushed by every single Democratic politician in the country. Let's watch another one. It's equally incredible.
So most of the patients that we have in the GEMS clinic actually know their gender, usually around the age of puberty, but a good portion of children do know as early as seemingly from the womb, and they will usually express their gender identity as very young children, some as soon as they can talk. They might say phrases such as I'm a girl, or I'm a boy, or I'm going to be a woman, or I'm going to be a mom. Kids know very, very early. So in the GEMS clinic we see a variety of young children all the way down to ages 2 and 3, and usually up to the ages of 9. When they come into the clinic, they'll see one of our psychologists, and we'll be talking to them about their gender. We'll be talking to their family about how to best support that child and how to make sure that that child has the space and support to explore their gender and do well throughout their development. And we'll be answering any parent questions. A lot of parents do have questions, and so we answer those questions. The biggest piece of advice I give parents who are coming through the gender clinic at Boston Children's Hospital is to just be supportive. Sometimes you might not understand, sometimes you feel like you don't know the terms, or you don't kind of get exactly what the child means when they say that they might be this gender, but the biggest thing you can do is just love your child and support them and just allow them to express themselves. That's the biggest protector as well against negative mental health effects such as depression, suicidality, anxiety that we worry about for our gender diverse kids and young adults. So that support from a parent is one of the best protective factors and one of the best things they can do.
Seemingly from the womb. From the same people who would abort a pregnancy during the 9th month. The children know seemingly from the womb that they're transgender. They start seeing patients as young as 2 or 3 years old. This is a cult. What are they doing to these kids? So medically, we've got this psychological transition going on, which is very harmful. And before I get into the medical stuff, let me talk about historically what's happened with children with what we call gender dysphoria. So historically, There have always been kids who just had this intense loathing of their biological sex. This was mostly boys, who from a very young age were more effeminate. Nothing wrong with that. They're what they are. But in maybe 1 out of 50,000 kids, they were diagnosed with what's called gender dysphoria, which is this intense loathing of their biological sex. They want to be the other sex. And we have studies into this, academic studies conducted by university researchers going back a few decades. The most recent study, and the one with the biggest sample size, was just a few years ago. And it followed 139 boys from the age of 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, all the way into their 20s. This was before they did all this puberty blocking nonsense. 87.8% of these children simply grew out of it. And about exactly 63.6% of them grew up to be gay. And if you look at all the different studies into gender dysphoria, this is what we see. 80 to 90% desistance rates, 50, 60% grow up to be gay. What's going on today is totally different. This isn't 1 out of 50,000 anymore. This is 1 out of 20. In schools, a few months ago, they did a survey of all the Pittsburgh high schools. 10% of the kids said they were transgender, non-binary. You get high schools now where 50% of the kids say they're something on the LGBTQ spectrum. Now, my talk, none of this is about LGB. We need to separate LGB from the T and the Q. LGB is sexual attraction. The T and the Q is about a denial of reality itself. So most of these kids would grow out of it. This is what we know, with kids with severe gender dysphoria that was prolonged from a very young age. Even they almost all grew out of it. What's happening today is all these girls, some boys too, it's increasing with boys as well, but it's mainly all these girls who, when they get into middle school and adolescence, they're having a tough time, as every woman in this room can attest to. They're getting sexualized by men, their bodies are changing, all that stuff. And about half of these kids, by the way, who now identify as trans, are on the autism spectrum. We know from the Tavistock in England, which is the single gender clinic that they had that saw thousands and thousands of kids, out of a sample size of more than 1,000 children, 35% of the children there had moderate to severe autism. If you include the mild cases, it's about 50%. Anecdotally, from speaking to hundreds of parents, I'd say it's even higher. So we got all these autistic kids. We've got girls who've been sexually abused, kids who've been abused in other ways, kids who've had trauma, kids with ADHD, kids with eating disorders, kids who are cutting, kids who hate their bodies, kids who grow up to be gay. All these kids struggling with something. There's always, literally always, some other comorbid factor going on. And what do? The child says, this girl says she's a boy. She goes into the endocrinologist who has 12 years of post-secondary education, who gets paid a few $100,000 a year. She walks into his office. She says, hey, doc, I'm a boy. What does he do? Congratulations, sweetheart. We're so glad you found your true self. Let's get you started on puberty blockers. What are puberty blockers? This is a drug that's never been approved for this purpose by the FDA. It's normally a drug called Lupron. Women in this room who've had uterine fibroids or endometriosis might have taken it, but they don't give it to women for more than 6 months. It's a drug that was originally designed to treat prostate cancer in men. So it's a cancer drug. Same drug also given to pedophiles in the past because it chemically castrates them. It destroys their sex drive completely. But we give this on an experimental basis to kids for the duration of their puberty, starting when they're 9, 10, 11 years old. They'll give these to kids at what's called Tanner stage 2 of puberty. This is when a girl's breast spurts start to form. They haven't even had their period yet. So for most girls, they're like 10 years old. Boys, maybe a year or two later, right? Well, guess what happens to these boys? We have the president of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, a trans woman, a biological male who now identifies as a woman, admitting on video that literally none of the boys who started on puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2, none of them as an adult have had any sexual function. They can't have an orgasm. What child who's 10 or 11 years old can possibly consent to that when they don't even understand what it means? This is insane. This is just the first step. And the whole idea of it is we don't want to add to the trauma of these children by having them grow into their sex. You know, you don't want their sex-based characteristics to develop. How awful would it be for a girl to develop breasts or for her hips to get wider? How awful would it be for a boy's penis to grow? Because that's what these puberty blockers do. They stop all of this from happening. They also cause bone demineralization. And a young girl from the age of 12 to 15 in Sweden was on these drugs. She suffered spinal fractures. She has osteopenia. She's in chronic pain. 12 other children at the Karolinska Hospital there suffered catastrophic injuries. And they've stopped it there. And now the whole government of Sweden has followed suit and they've stopped this practice. They're not doing the opposite sex hormones either. Finland has stopped it. England has stopped it just a few weeks ago. And what England's doing now also is they're saying that these psychological transitions are harmful. Because you're locking in this identity in place to a child, and then you're celebrating them. So you've got this 10 or 11 or 12-year-old struggling. They come out as trans. What happens in our society today? They get celebrated in school. Their doctor affirms them. Their psychologist affirms them. Counselors approve them. Teachers affirm them. A lot of these parents affirm them. Their whole school's affirming them, and they're celebrating them. Because it's not cool to be what they call cisgender, which is just a man identifying as a man. That's not cool anymore. All these girls especially are exploring all these different identities. They're pansexual, asexual, demi-boys, non-binary, whatever that means. It means they're neither, or they're both. This stuff's wild. But now you've given a child an identity. What chance, when this child is getting all this affirmation, all this love, all these hits of endorphins from all their friends, what chance do they have of backing out of this? I can tell you the percentage who back out of it after you psychologically transition them. It's 2%. If they were left alone, they would almost all grow out of it. Even more than what we know historically, because this isn't real gender dysphoria. This is just a craze affecting adolescents. They'd all grow out of it. But when you psychologically transition them and you start them on these puberty blocking drugs, 98% of them continue on to the cross-sex hormones. So now you're giving girls testosterone, you're giving boys estrogen. Boys are growing breasts. After 4 or 5 years on testosterone, these girls have to get hysterectomies. Sometimes they're getting bilateral oophorectomies where they remove their ovaries as well, so now they can't produce estrogen for the rest of their life. We're turning children into lifelong pharmaceutical patients, and we're calling this love. Now my friend here who's going to speak next, Colin Wright, he's an evolutionary biologist. He can speak to this with more intelligence than me. But whether you believe in God or evolution, none of this makes any sense. Because if you believe in God, you're saying that God made us wrong. If you believe in evolution, you're saying that after 1 billion years of evolution, after 200,000 years of humans on this planet, that somehow this long billion-year process of natural selection has failed, and for the first time in human history, in this little 10-year window, a pharmaceutical company is here to help our children be who they really are? This is total and utter madness. But the numbers are skyrocketing. 2021, more than 100,000 official diagnoses of gender dysphoria in the United States. That's underrepresented. That's triple what it was just a few years before. In the last 10 years, the number of children, girls, who identify as trans is up about 4,000%. 40 times. And it's still growing like mad because guess what? They're pushing this into schools. So we got a bunch of amazing moms for liberty here today. Dads, too. I know a lot of you are involved with your school boards and you speak at your school board meetings. We have to make this a central issue because the people who are pushing this have no idea what they're doing. A lot of these people might be well-intentioned. But this is how evil flourishes. By well-intentioned people who don't know what they're doing. By false propaganda. So we have to be able to have conversations about this and we have to spread awareness of what's happening. So that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. After I got my signs made, I've got different messages. I've got my dad. I've got gender ideology does not belong in schools. My main message is children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And I travel around North America. I go to busy street corners. I started going across Canada, just having one conversation at a time. And I've been assaulted a bunch of times. I've had my arm broken by Antifa in Montreal. But I don't care. Because broken bones heal, but what we're doing to our kids is far more damaging. And so I'm not going to stop until this cult of gender ideology has been stopped. Now let's go to our next video here. We have all these Democrats all the time. Oh, I've got a remote. We have all these Democrats all the time And it is Democrats. Sorry if I'm offending to any Democrats, but it's them pushing this. Not all of them, but only them. And they say all these surgeries aren't done on kids, right? Okay, here's another expert at Boston Children's Hospital.
Gender-affirming hysterectomy is very similar to most hysterectomies that occur. A hysterectomy itself is the removal of the uterus, the cervix, which is the opening of the uterus, and the fallopian tubes, which are attached to the sides of the uterus. Some gender-affirming hysterectomies will also include the removal of the ovaries, but that's technically a separate procedure called a bilateral oophorectomy. And not every gender-affirming hysterectomy includes that, and people who are getting gender-affirming hysterectomies do not have to have their ovaries removed.
Isn't she perky? Inspirational music in the background as we talk about gender-affirming hysterectomies. That video went viral a few months ago. One of my followers on Twitter had tweeted it as a reply, and I went, whoa, I love this. This is great for what I do, because no one ever believes me when I talk about this stuff. So I tweeted it out, and it started to pick up steam. The Post-Millennial wrote about it. I think it was Christina Buttons here who wrote about it. Thank you, Christina, for all your work. Christina now works for the Daily Wire. And I got a little worried they were going to delete it, so I made a recording of it. And guess what? They deleted it. So then I tweeted it out again, and I sent it to Libs of TikTok, and I sent it to Matt Walsh. They were kind enough to retweet it, and it went boom. So there were a whole bunch of other videos on their YouTube channel. I recorded 40 of them. They deleted them all. The next one is another one they've deleted. So I'd like to know, why are all these children's hospitals hiding their work?
The eligibility for getting gender-affirming surgeries at Boston Children's Hospital is basically the same as it would be for most other hospitals or surgeons in the United States. And that's the case because we all follow the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH, standards of care. For top surgery, you are requested, but not required, to have been on gender-affirming hormones for at least a year. If you're a trans woman, it's really encouraged that you be on estrogen for at least a year because you want to maximize your natural breast growth. Many surgical centers require you to be 18. At Boston Children's Hospital, for top surgeries, we'll see people as young as age 15 if they've been affirmed in their gender for a long period of time and don't really have any other life complications that make surgery inappropriate.
So WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, used to have age limits for all this stuff, which were just guidelines. These aren't laws, these aren't regulations, they're just guidelines. They go younger than that all the time. After I tweeted out this video, someone actually defending the Boston Children's Hospital responded to one of my tweets, and she told me that she had her double mastectomy done at 14 years of age. Now, I've got another video, I think it's my next one. Check this out.
Yeah, I think folks have kind of covered the blockers and hormones, but I'll talk about surgical care a little bit. In terms of masculinizing top surgery, I think 12 is the youngest who's had surgery through our program. And in terms of general reconstructive surgeries, we haven't had anyone under the age of 18 have phalloplasty or lymphedoplasty, but we have had a few patients starting 15. I don't think surgery actually happened until 16 that have had vaginoplasty.
Okay, that was hard to hear. He admitted the youngest patient they've cut the breasts off of is 12 years old. And they're castrating 16-year-old boys. This is at the Kaiser Permanente in Oakland, California, where my friend Chloe Cole, who spoke at the rally in Nashville a couple weeks ago, had her breast cut off at 15. When she went to her pre-surgical appointment, there were 12 other kids there, many of whom were younger than her. So, it's a child abuse scandal. And we're a bunch of parents. The government isn't going to fix this. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix it by getting it out of schools. We're going to fix it by making noise. And we're going to fix it by having conversations about this very important topic. So, I think I've got a couple more slides here. I forget what they are. That's me. You can follow me on Twitter at Billboard Chris. It's hard to find me because Twitter's censoring me. You have to be 18 to follow me, so you have to, isn't that convenient? The people who actually need to see this message can't see it. So, you gotta be 18 to follow me. You have to adjust your settings to allow sensitive content because all of my pictures won't show up otherwise. And don't show up in the search bar, but it's at Billboard Chris. You can go to my website, billboardchris.com. You'll find my Twitter feed on there as well. It might be an easier way to find it. And I'm just going to keep traveling around. I'm going to be at Vanderbilt for the next 2 days. I'm going down to Alabama for a few days. I'm going to be outside the Country Music Awards. Singing. No, I'm not going to sing. But there's going to be lots of cameras and media, so who knows what'll happen. I go to wherever people are. And I'm going to be down in Alabama at the University of the hospital in Birmingham there, and I'm going to be going to the University of Alabama as well. I'll be back here on the weekend, hanging out in Nashville, having conversations. So if you want to support my cause, I keep traveling around. There's a donate button on my website, but mostly I just ask you all to have conversations. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. We have time? We have time for questions? Okay.
Chris, what's happening to your girls?
My girls are great. My girls were never affected by this. Yeah, they're beautiful. They're thriving. My girls are 10, almost 13, both top of their class. My daughter sent me her biology test today. She got 50 out of 47 because she got the bonus questions too. She's in math club on the side, so according to these gender ideologues, that would make her on the boy end of the spectrum. But they fully understand what I'm doing. I'm not worried about them at all. And in fact, at the end of grade 7 last year, the teacher taught this, it's similar to the genderbread person. It's called the gender unicorn, this cute little unicorn that these teachers teach. Teaching stereotypes, define your sex, all that nonsense. And he taught this, and my daughter said in front of the class, well, it seems to me this whole thing is just about stereotypes. Like, girls can have short hair. And you know what happened? The whole class, which had been quiet, all piped up in agreement. Human psychology never changes, right? Look back in history. Every time evil has flourished, 99.9% of people were quiet because they were afraid. And that's how it flourishes. It's the same thing with this. Everyone's quiet. And some people have to be quiet. Parents who have kids affected by this have to be quiet because if they're not, they alienate their own kids. Or in Canada, you can lose your child. They consider it abuse not to affirm your child's new name and pronouns. CPS can take your child away. A dad in BC, British Columbia, went to jail last year for speaking out against the transition of her daughter. And what happened was the first year they started teaching this in school, his elementary school age daughter, I think she was 10 at the time, maybe 11, she decided she was a boy. This is what happens. If you teach kids something, they're going to believe you. These same kids believe in the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus. They're children. Do we forget what children are? Their brains are developing. They're just little. Our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain responsible for logical decision-making, doesn't stop developing until we're about 25 years old. And for these kids who are neurodivergent, more like 30. But we expect these 12-year-olds to make these life-changing decisions. Anyway, this girl decided she was a boy. She was 11 or 12. They sent her to this psychologist. This guy's name was Wallace Wong. He works for the BC Ministry of Children and Families. He's admitted on video at a talk he gave at the Vancouver Public Library that he's transitioning over 1,000 kids socially, psychologically, including more than 500 in the foster system. And in every state in this country as well, kids in the foster system are wildly overrepresented. It's all these vulnerable kids. So this psychologist then sent this girl to the BC Children's Hospital. And this same story repeats all over the place. But at 13 years of age, this girl signed a consent form to go on testosterone. And you know how I talked about how the WPATH standards of care, they used to have these age limits, which they've completely just gotten rid of in the last month? Well, their recommendation was no opposite sex hormones until 16 years of age. Well, at the BC Children's Hospital, and at Children's Hospital all over the place, they decided to give them to her at 13. The dad refused to sign the consent form. The endocrinologist sent him a letter saying, you can be a friend and advisor to your child. a friend and advisor, but you cannot intervene in this medical process. This happens in certain states as well. Washington State now, any 13-year-old can walk in to the doctor's office, get puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, they can even get a double mastectomy without their parents' knowledge or consent, using their parents' private insurance. And the parent will get the bill for the copay with the procedure and drug redacted. They passed a law. They passed a series of laws to make this happen. And it's not just for gender stuff, it's abortions and everything, right? At 13 now, this child is like an emancipated minor, basically, in Washington State. And what happens in the foster system throughout the country is if the child goes into foster care, they're considered emancipated minors, and they'll start this at any age as well, so then parental consent isn't needed. So these kids are also all online, and they're getting coached. Grooming. They're getting coached what to say. And they're all told, say you're suicidal. There's only two arguments that the trans activists ever have. They say that kids will kill themselves if you don't let them transition, which is not true, but it is true that suicidality is higher. And so when you're having these conversations with people, and when I'm having these conversations, and I've had about 10,000 of these out on the street, you never want to just bat heads with somebody. It's best to find some source of agreement. So it's true that suicidality is higher. Yes, these are struggling children. Obviously suicidality is higher. We need to help them. But this is the only condition in the world where we accept a child's self-diagnosis, affirm them, and then start them on this regimen of drugs, hormones, surgeries. If an anorexic girl goes into the children's hospital, do we affirm her anorexia? Do we say, yes, sweetheart, you are dramatically overweight, let's give you liposuction? If she says she's going to kill herself, do we go, oh, okay, we'll give you whatever you want then. No food for you. No, that would be insane. But children are now running the show. And insane people and child abusers are running the show. The other argument you always hear is that puberty blockers are reversible. Okay. Who's got a time machine? Nobody. How's time reversible? If you go on puberty blockers from 12 to 17, how do you go back to 12 to go through puberty again? You can't. These boys have a micropenis for life. And then when they want to do these sex reassignment surgeries, these bottom surgeries, what they do is they invert the penis, and I'm sorry if I get so graphic here, but they do a penile inversion surgery, it's called. But because it never grew, there's not enough tissue. So what do? They cut out a piece of this boy's stomach, or they cut out a piece of his colon, and they use that to form the interior of this neo-vagina. This is disgusting stuff. So word's getting out there. When I tweeted out these Boston Children's Hospital videos, they all went viral. And it started off a wave of people investigating all these other hospitals, and it really woke up all the conservative media in this country. So I'm really happy about that. And all these podcasters, all these media are now talking about it, and finally politicians are talking about it. And I've been meeting with members of Congress, I've been meeting with their representatives since March. I've got a friend in Washington who started setting up meetings for me. Back in March, April, May, June, none of them wanted to touch this. So just in a few months, it's changed dramatically. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, because I'm very hopeful, because I know, without a shadow of doubt, that we're going to win this battle. It's simply a matter of how many children are harmed before we do. Next question. Hi.
Hi. So we heard a lot about the medical procedures and the threats against parents, but there was a medical procedure that I saw up on the screen that you didn't touch on, and it looked like a broken arm. And I was wondering if that was yours and what legal consequence they suffered for doing that to you if it was.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was up there. Yeah, I got attacked in Montreal, 5 or 6 guys, 1 woman. I was just standing there having a conversation, and I got jumped, I got punched in the face instantly, took a big punch to the back of the head. Both my signs were ripped off. A guy took one sign into the middle of the street, stomped on my body cam, which really irked me because I wanted the footage for police. And a few of them fled right away. I think they got into a car, and 3 remained. And so I pulled out my phone to film to get their image for police, and I was backing up down the sidewalk. I'm not going to run from Antifa, never. But this guy picked up a traffic cone, a big traffic cone, and the base on those things is pretty thick, and he swung it at me 4 times at my face, and I blocked it each time with my forearm, but one of those blows broke my arm, so yeah, that's where that came from. The question is, what consequences did they face? This is Canada, ma'am. None. They didn't even investigate. Because my message that we should protect children and not sterilize them is not politically popular. I got a phone call 27 days later from the investigator who was just starting the investigation. I'd sent my footage. They had footage from one street camera, but they could have gotten footage from all these other cameras on the street because there's cameras everywhere. This was in Montreal. And he phoned me a month later, and guess what? They'd lost the street footage. He didn't do anything. And he told me unless I could get them the names of my attackers, there's nothing I could do, that they could do. So, whatever. It's okay. I'd do it again because it got a lot of media, and they helped my cause. So I want to thank Antifa very much. Thank you.
I have
Anyone
a question.
Yeah.
Here.
Hi.
Hi. How much do you think Vanderbilt is involved in any of this?
Great question, and I'm going to be there tomorrow. So I would encourage you to talk to Christina Buttons here after, because she's been breaking stories about Vanderbilt. But they're very responsible as well. They've been doing surgeries on kids, but because of Matt Walsh, because of Christina, they announced last month that they're stopping all surgeries on children. Yes, let's clap. I think they refer kids out still for puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, but Matt Walsh announced just yesterday that he's seen a draft of the legislation that Tennessee is introducing to stop all this so-called gender-affirming care, which we should really just call child sex changes instead of these fluffy names that they give them. But there's legislation coming to stop this in Tennessee. So everyone involved, everyone in this state, whoever's connected to other political action committees or whatever, we've all got to get involved and get behind this because there's going to be a huge pushback to stop this. Arkansas and Alabama passed legislation as well, but right away a federal judge blocked it and it's gone to the courts. And the problem when you go to courts is they bring in experts from the AMA, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and all these so-called experts say, oh no, this is the right way to do it, this is the science. But the American Academy of Pediatrics, I was at their convention a couple months ago, they're ignoring calls from within their own body to do a systematic review of this because there is no evidence to support it. Sweden did a review, England did a review, Finland did a review. France has said that it's impossible to say which of these children will speak out about it. They're urging caution. The same thing in New Zealand with their Psychiatrics Association. We have all these other countries who are finally waking up. But here in the United States, this issue has become so politicized that no one on the Democratic side will dare touch it, and they just keep pushing it 100 miles an hour. So we need the boards of medicine to get involved as well, because honestly, Florida's gone about this the right way. Just this week, they banned this, but they didn't do it through legislation. They did it through their board of medicine. And they conducted a review, they examined all the science, they held hearings, they listened to the detransitioners, and they've stopped this practice. So another huge win for Ron DeSantis.
Man, go Ron.
Hi.
So is there anybody that has been forthright enough to talk to these youth and explain to them that no matter how much castration that these obviously uneducated, ignorant people are trying to force on them at their young age, are they aware of the fact that there is no way to change your gender? Do they know that that is a lie? And that them castrating and cutting off body parts and the horrific things that are being done to them, is anyone telling them that this is a bold-faced lie?
Well, there's people like me, there's people like Colin and Christina, and now there'll be people like you. But no, there's not enough people talking about this. Nobody was talking about this 2 years ago.
Well, but my point
it's increasing.
is I think they need to be told it's a lie, that no matter what they do, they will never change their gender. It's like me getting up, if I don't want to get out of bed at 3 in the morning and I'm kicking and screaming because I don't want to get out of bed, am I going to change the clocks of time? Right? No. It's reality. You were born a man or you were born a woman. Well, and I feel like that's the way we have to come at this, is by the measuring line of truth.
That's right.
And let them know that this is not possible. You are being lied to and you're going to look like a freak.
That's right. And you don't have to go along with someone else's delusional pronouns either. Because when you do that, you're just kind of propping this whole thing up. Be polite, whatever, but you don't have to lie. No one can compel our speech to lie. And we don't have to agree that the emperor is clothed when he's not. Now, a lot of these kids are not being told of the side effects either. They have no idea what they're signing up for. I've tweeted out hundreds of stories of these detransitioners because what happens is these kids transition, and then around 3, 4, 5 years later, after the initial glow has worn off and all the love bombing isn't as effective anymore and all the medical complications are starting to pile up, well, guess what? It didn't make them happier. And now their dating pool's basically been reduced to zero. They can't have kids. They're getting older. It's just terrible. You have girls asking questions in some of these groups who had their breasts cut off, asking when their breasts will grow back. They're babies. Some of them are struggling with other mental issues as well. But it's just awful. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Chris. It is an honor having Chris here in Williamson County tonight. It's also an honor to introduce to you Dr. Colin Wright, who is an evolutionary biologist, journalist, and founding editor of Reality's Last Stand, which is a publication dedicated to free speech and the sex and gender debate. His writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, Newsweek, Quillette, and other major publications. He's been a guest on popular TV shows and podcasts such as The Joe Rogan Experience, Tucker Carlson, Trigonometry, Timcast, and more. And we're honored to have him here tonight. Welcome, Dr. Wright.
Okay, can you all hear me? Cool. Well, that was an amazing talk, and I've never given a talk before where my blood is boiling to begin the entire. I've never given a talk before where my blood is boiling to begin the entire thing, but I deal with this stuff every day. This is what I do for a living now. I deal with the whole gender and sex debate, but nothing like that talk. It never ceases to amaze me how insane things really get. So I was just a biologist in the lab about 5 years ago before I started talking about this stuff. And I heard a lot of my colleagues saying a bunch of crazy things about biology. They would share stuff on Facebook saying something like, there's 5 sexes, or sex is a social construct, or there's 10 sexes, or sex is a complete social construct. And so as a biologist, at first I was just saying well, I have a bunch of scientific colleagues, they're all scientists as well. And in science, what do? We just make an argument based on evidence, and then if they would like to, come back, they would bring more evidence to the table, and we can have an actual scientific discussion about this type of thing. But that wasn't what I received. Instead, I was called a bigot, a transphobe. They're trying to silence me. People posting things on job boards that, I was applying for professor jobs at the time, just doing everything to really make it impossible for me to get a job in the field that I had been studying for 12 years. I was in grad school for 5 years. I had 4 years of undergrad. I was doing a 2-year postdoc at the time. So this is not what science is supposed to be. And so at first, it started out as just this, people are wrong about science, and then I wanted to look at where this is coming from. And when I kind of looked beneath the hood, I realized that the rabbit hole went pretty deep, and it got really, really crazy. I didn't really understand what the philosophies were behind all this stuff that was producing this insanity. I was just seeing sort of the end point of all of this. And so I wrote an article for Quillette called The New Evolution Deniers that went really viral, and it was just sort of me coming out about all these ideas, just trying to debunk these crazy ideas about biology. And this sort of just put a major target on my back. So basically the cancellation was successful, so I ended up leaving academia just to talk about this full time, because I couldn't really imagine a scenario where I would be teaching about my research, which was the social behavior of spiders and social insects and wasps, ants, things like that, knowing that half the students in my class don't know what males and females are. Like, why am I telling them about how the personality of queens can dictate the personality of their colonies? You know, this is like esoteric stuff at the fringes of knowledge. But the bridge behind me of that all of our biological, scientific predecessors had created, and that bridge was just crumbling behind me. So I needed to sort of go back and try to fix this crumbling bridge. So I'm going to start out talking about biological sex, because this really is a fundamental thing that all this gender ideology is built on. It rests on this idea that sex is a social construct, that there's no such thing as males and females, that there's just sort of degrees of maleness and femaleness. And since we can never be so sure about someone's biological sex, we just need to defer to their gender identity. That's basically what their arguments are. So my talk is, what is a woman? Sex and gender ideology. So I'll first go over sex, and I'll kind of talk about the whole gender stuff and how that's kind of building on top of this whole thing. So just a quick basic overview. Sexual reproduction. It's a type of reproduction that involves a complex life cycle in which a gamete, such as a sperm or egg cell, with a single set of chromosomes combines with another to produce a zygote that develops into an organism composed with two sets of chromosomes. So we start off with the sperm and ova. Those become fused, they form a zygote. They then form an embryo. And then we get a full-fledged organism that's going to be either male or female that's going to grow up and then repeat the cycle all the way from the beginning. So pretty basic. So what are males and females? Pretty basic question. So it has to do with this, has to do with creating sperm or ova. So broadly speaking, males are the sex that produce small gametes, sperm, and females produce large gametes, ova, okay? Now, a lot of activists will come in here and they'll say that, well, what about children? Boys don't produce sperm until they go through puberty. What about postmenopausal women? They're not creating eggs. So are they sexless? So do women lose their sex? They're no longer female when they go through menopause? Are boys no longer males when they're, before they go through puberty? So this is sort of where they try just to like break these little barriers by poking holes in this stuff. So when we talk about the sex of an individual, okay, when we're saying, is this individual a male or female? Basically we're talking about the type of gamete that their anatomy is organized around through development to produce. Whether or not that anatomy is functional, You can have a car that breaks down, it's still a car, it's just a non-functional car. If your spark plugs blow up, it's not a car anymore. So it really has to do with just sort of the design plan that you have in your primary reproductive anatomy. This is stuff we all know, okay? This is stuff they know too, but I think they just need to go out of their way to obfuscate as much as possible on this stuff. So, because there is no third or intermediate gamete, there's no intermediate anatomy that can be developed around this third gamete, and so there's only two sexes in humans, and so biological sex is binary. That's just as straightforward as it gets. There's no speg or sperg, despite everyone trying to look for these. There's just sperm and eggs. And so even if individuals might have some intermediate type of intersex condition where they have ambiguous genitalia, that doesn't mean that there's three sexes. It doesn't mean it's a social construct, because there's only two types of gametes there are for your genitals to be organized around, basically. So this should be the end of the talk, honestly. Like, there's just nothing you can say to this, but they do say a lot to it. And so I'm going to kind of go over some of the basic arguments that they make to try to just undermine this entire just straightforward Bio 101 talk. So there's a few angles that they'll take. So debunking some myths here. So one myth is that sex is a spectrum. And the other one is that there are more than two sexes. There seems to be this phobia of there being any number of sex besides two. So you can have 3 sexes, that's fantastic. You can have 5 sexes, great. Infinite number of sexes, it's a spectrum, amazing. 2 sexes, you're a bigot. That's basically where they're coming from. What I want to do is I want to see the people who are arguing for three sexes argue with the sex spectrum people, because really those should be no different than the people who are arguing for two who are arguing against the sex spectrum. But really they just have this phobia of binaries, basically. So this is sort of how the sex spectrum is often portrayed. You know, they might say that there's males and females on one side, and then you have this broad sort of intersex middle ground here. They actually kind of go a little bit more beyond. They try to make it sound more scientific by sort of proposing something like this. This is what we call a bimodal distribution, and they'll say that, you know, there's really no such thing as males and females. There's just sort of these statistical areas of more or less maleness and femaleness. So they'll have something like this, and there's this sort of area in the middle that's just your, you know, sort of the intersex valley. So that's how they kind of portray it. And this isn't something that's just on some internet forums that, you know, you have to hunt to get. You know, these are ideas that are in Scientific American, it's Discover Magazine, really popular YouTube channels, gets over millions of views for these things, arguing that sex is a spectrum. The entire books. This is one of the most insane books I've ever read. It's completely bonkers. The Trevor Project. This is the New York Times. This is the 5 sexes. This is one thing that sort of started me to push back on this stuff. And then maybe the biggest thing that got me to start pushing back was when Nature posted an article. You can see what it says. The idea of 2 sexes is simplistic. Biologists now think there is a wider spectrum than that. This is supposed to be the most prestigious scientific journal in the entire world. So what we can't do anymore, we can't have people tell us, you know, I'll argue with someone saying that, you know, sex is not a spectrum, you need to do some better research on this. Well, normally doing their better research would be to look at the most prestigious scientific journals in the world, and now they go to Nature and they say, okay, what's your retort? Nature says sex is a spectrum. You know, all we can do is tell people to listen to my actual arguments. You know, you can't just trust the authorities anymore because these institutions have been captured completely. And so, you know, it's not just fringe, and it's not just innocuous either. You know, this has really big consequences for society. You know, if sex is a spectrum and we just need to rely on people's self-reported gender identity, well, now all of a sudden you have males can just identify their way into a female sport, become the NCAA Division I women's swimming champion. There's Laurel Hubbard. This is made it to the Olympics, took the place of a woman who's there. And then there's the Connecticut track meet. I can't remember their names, but these are just boys who identified as girls, took first and second in the state. I think one of them broke a state record, and they've, you know, taking scholarships away from girls who would otherwise, you know, be winning these races. So there's 2 main arguments for the sex spectrum. One of them is based on the existence of intersex conditions. Okay, these are sort of conditions where you might have ambiguous genitalia at birth, or maybe your internal reproductive anatomy, you know, you have testes or ova, maybe that doesn't sort of correspond to how you look on the outside. There's various reasons why that can happen. Then there's the sort of argument for what are called secondary sex characteristics, and these are the characteristics that you develop when you're going through puberty. You know, so boys and girls look mostly the same. They have different genitalia, of course, but when they go through puberty, this is when sort of you have breast development in girls, males start getting facial hair, their voice deepens. These are what we call secondary sex characteristics. So those take place during puberty. So first I'll go through the intersex arguments. So, I can't really read that back there. The intersex argument is sex cannot be binary if some individuals have sexual anatomy that appears to fall somewhere between males and females. This is a Scientific American article that they have where they just basically make this big sex spectrum. They have typical male and female on either ends of this, and they have a bunch of arrows that are needlessly complex, unnecessarily so. We can find out that they've sort of just made arrows go all the way across, even when they don't need to. They could have made it a more straightforward chart, but they purposely make it look more complex to give people that sort of deer in the headlights look. When some normal person who's not a biologist looks at this, it just makes you want to say, I'll just trust the experts. This is way too complex. What do I know? How am I going to debunk this chart? This would take a lifetime. This is what the real sex spectrum looks like. So about 1 out of every 5,000 people at birth have genitals that appear to be somewhat of intermediate just on basic appearance. But even when we go down to that little white box, if we look and investigate that more, basically all these individuals too can be just easily designated male or female just with a few extra tests. It's conceivably possible that someone theoretically could be born maybe with both ovarian tissue and testicular tissue and have like this complex mix. There's various ways that maybe someone might have a sex that could be undefined. You're really kind of just on the line there, but that wouldn't really be a third sex because again, there's not this third gamete, this third reproductive sex cell for their genitals to be organized around. Okay, this would just be sort of maybe a sexless individual. But to this day, there haven't really been any individuals that fit this description. Okay, at least in humans. So a lot of times people will conflate the claim, I just sort of clarified this, that there are only two sexes with the claim that every human can be unambiguously categorized as either male or female. I mentioned it's good to leave open the possibility that someone might be sexually ambiguous. But again, as I just said, that doesn't mean that you're a third sex or that sex is a spectrum. Basically what they're trying to do is, I'll go back. So one way to sort of, I like to use an example here about why the existence of this small minority of individuals does not sort of blur the entire picture of males and females. I use like this example of a coin flip. So we know that, say, a coin has two faces, right? It's got a heads and it's got a tails. So when you flip it, you think there's probably two discrete outcomes. Well, that's true, except for the fact that we know that 1 out of 6,000 flips with a nickel will land on its edge. So does this mean that heads and tails are social constructs? No, this is what they would have you believe. They want you to say that the existence of that 1 out of 5,000 intersex individual means you can extend that ambiguity to the entire picture. Okay, and it just so happens that it's almost the same frequency. The chance that a nickel will land on its edge is almost the same percentage that you'll have an individual born with like a ambiguous genitalia to some degree. Yes, so there's trying to, with people like Leah Thomas, who's competing in female sports. Basically, they're saying that the existence of that white box means that someone who's unambiguously male in the blue category should be able to, compete in the other category, in the pink category, and vice versa. They're trying to extend that blur from this white box to the entire picture. So now I'm going to look at the argument from secondary sex characteristics. And remember, these are the characteristics that you gain when you go through puberty that differentiate males and females. So the argument from secondary sex characteristics says that because the distributions of these secondary sex characteristics can overlap between males and females, that we should therefore view biological sex as a continuum. So males and females differ in their breast development. There are some males that have breast development. There are some women who are taller than most males. There are some males who have voices that are higher pitched than most females. Some females have very deep voices, so you can basically go down and look at every single trait that's associated, like a secondary sex characteristic, and you can say that there's overlap in all of these secondary sex characteristics, okay? And what the activists are trying to do is say, because there's overlap in any trait you can basically point to, and they'll purposely not point to things like your gonads, therefore we need to look at sex on a spectrum. There's nothing really that categorizes, there's no one thing that categorizes males or females. It can't be height, it's not going to be how much facial hair you have because here's a bearded lady, that type of stuff. They'll use the genderbread person. This is something that Chris brought up. This is extremely common. They even use this in certain college classes. I've had students in college send me these, okay? And this is sort of a way that this ideology is posited. So let's zoom in on the biological sex component of this. As you'll see, it doesn't say that males and females actually exist. It just has varying degrees of femaleness and maleness. And they're not even really a spectrum going back and forth. They're kind of just starting from a cancel sign. I don't even know what that means. But when we sort of zoom in on what are the traits that they're associating with your degree of maleness and femaleness, body shape, voice pitch, body hair, and hormones. That's interesting. So if you have a low-pitched voice and you're a woman, you're less female, you're more male. Body hair, if you're a hairy woman, you're more male, literally, based on their ideology. This is just pseudoscience craziness. So I have an analogy that I like to use to sort of really bring home this difference between primary sex characteristics and secondary ones. So the primary sex characteristics are your genitalia, your gonads, and then there's all the other stuff that are secondary to that you gain through puberty, which is like your breasts, your growing a beard, type of thing like that. So we can think of this in terms of maybe bikers and cyclists, okay? So we ask ourselves, what is a biker? Well, a biker is someone who rides a motorcycle, and a cyclist is someone who rides a bicycle. Whether you're a biker or a cyclist depends on that binary criteria of the type of vehicle that you're riding, okay? But there's also these secondary characteristics that we associate with bikers and cyclists. So bikers, maybe they'll have tattoos, maybe they'll wear thick leather outfits because they're traveling at high speeds and it offers them better protection. Cyclists, they wear the spandex suits, much lighter, they don't have to worry about falling off as much because they're slower speeds. And so there's all these secondary characteristics that we associate with these, but these aren't the definition of being a biker or a cyclist. These are just sort of, attributes that they have that make sense based on the type of vehicle that they're riding. So you could have this person here riding this, a person who looks like a cyclist, but they're actually a biker if they're riding a motorcycle. And likewise, if either of these people are riding a bicycle, they're going to be cyclists, even though they look like bikers. So this is sort of how I try to teach people about the difference between primary and secondary sex characteristics. The primary is what define your sex. Secondary, it's just a consequence of your sex. It's sort of related to, but it's downstream. Okay. Is sex bimodal? This is something I addressed a little bit earlier, but I'll go in a little more detail. So the secondary sex characteristics argument often give rise to the sex is a bimodal spectrum claim. This is made by people on Twitter a lot. I think this particular Twitter thread got something like 20,000 retweets. This is the first time I saw this argument. They're saying that you have these varying degrees of maleness and femaleness. The consequences of this, though, really boil down to what I kind of call sort of this playground bully logic. Because if this is true, if your degree of maleness and femaleness looks like this, if there's no males and females, it's just varying degrees. Like, well, one, what is on the x-axis that's going, horizontal? They don't usually define that. Is this breast size? So is female D more female than female C in this one? If it's voice pitch, is male A more of a male than male B? Now you can imagine a scenario on a kid getting bullied, a little boy who might be more effeminate, and the classmates are teasing him and saying, "What are you, a girl?" And then you really have to take seriously the claim that the teacher could come over with their sex spectrum chart, look at little Billy, and just be like, "Maybe you are a girl." Like, this is just feeding into this bullying tactic, because if there's no such thing as male or female, then that's up for grabs whether or not Billy is actually a boy or a girl. In reality, with this bimodal spectrum, because there is sort of this bimodality that we see with regard to sex, but this is a product of the fact that there are two sexes, and that each of those sexes varies in degree on certain traits. This is height, for instance. So when you actually look beneath the surface a little bit at what makes this bimodal spectrum, you get the fact that you have, men who are on average taller than females, but you can still have really tall females who are taller than most of the men, and you can have really short males who are shorter than most females. It's not how you define sex, though. This is just overlap in certain traits that we all have. So the next sort of argument is, are there more than two sexes? And I'll go through this quickly. This was, made most popular by Anne Fausto Sterling in the New York Times, writing about the 5 sexes. She said that, for biologically speaking, there are many gradations running from male to female. Along that spectrum lie at least 5 sexes, perhaps even more. This is, whenever you talk about there being only two sexes, you'll just get people just send you Anne Fausto Sterling stuff. She's not actually a biologist, she's just like a biology commentator, but she doesn't actually do any empirical work whatsoever. And again, she's been popularized in the New York Times. These YouTube videos, you know, it really is everywhere. Here's a person online, Dr. Shay Akil McLean, and lists 5 different degrees, BA, MA, MA, PhD. And this person says, you know, I'm a transgender biologist, speaking as an evolutionary geneticist. They're actually not, I looked at their citations. In humans, there are 6 common sex karyotypes, and then they list them, and then there are 4 rare sex karyotypes. This is dealing with our chromosomes. And so this person thinks that there's, according to this, 10 different sexes based on just the types of chromosomal arrangements you have with their X and Y chromosomes. I looked more into this. There's actually 11 different arrangements that are conceivable that I think have been documented in humans, the types of chromosomal arrangements you can have. But what they're leaving out is the fact that your sex isn't defined by the type of sex chromosomes you have. You know, we say that the chromosomes are sex determining. Well, all that means in a technical sense for a biologist is that these chromosomes begin this cascade of events that trigger development to go in one of 2 directions that result in a male or female. But a male and female aren't defined by what chromosomes you have. That's just sort of a mechanism. You're defined as a male or female by your primary reproductive anatomy. So if we actually apply the actual definition of biological sex to this, we'll find that the sexes of these different karyotypes, as you call them, is female, male, female, male, 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 female, female, male, male. Only 2. So we've reduced 11 down to 2, just when we realize that what a male and female is just about their sexual anatomy. And this is really clear too, because they're not all organisms have what's called chromosomal sex determination. Some creatures, like a lot of reptiles, their sex is determined by the temperature at which they incubate. Okay, but we don't define a male alligator based on the fact that they incubated at a certain temperature. They're defined as a male because of their reproductive anatomy. So this is all just ways to try to obfuscate and get people just to say, I don't know, sure, identify as whatever you want, just leave me alone. So what is a woman? This is the biggest question that we have, is Matt Walsh's documentary. We have a Supreme Court justice who claims to not know what the answer to this question is. And we see a lot of professors in Matt Walsh's video who seem to be, you know, they're gender studies, they're in women's studies programs, and they can't define what a woman is. So as a biologist, I'll tell you exactly what a woman is. A woman is an adult, an organism that has reached sexual maturity. So in humans, we have sort of what we call legal sex, because we realize that sexual maturity and sort of mental maturity aren't necessarily the same thing, and so we define, you know, an adult as being 18 years old. It would be different if we're talking about mice or things like that. A woman is a human, a member of the species Homo sapiens, and since we're a mammal, we'd use what's called the biological definition of species, which is you're a part of the same species if you can reproduce with the other individual and create fertile offspring, okay? And we can do that. And then a female is an individual whose reproductive anatomy is organized around, through development, the production of large gametes. So this is what a woman is. If anyone asks you that, go back to this slide. It's that simple. Why does this matter? So it initially angered me because public trust in science is completely diminished if we can't get this sort of low-hanging fruit right. I mean, we just went through a pandemic, okay, and this thing is extremely complex, requires massive data sets, not only on vaccines, but tracking the virus spreading, looking at new variants. You can't do this in your home. But what you can do, and what we all can do, is look at someone and know if they're with almost complete certainty whether they're male or female. Okay, so if we're having scientists tell us to believe all the stuff about, you know, vaccines, about global warming, things that require much higher degrees of expertise. But those same people are also telling us males and females are social constructs. They're not real. It's just in your mind. It's arbitrary. It's constructed by people in power to oppress people. You know, how can we possibly agree with them on more complex things if they can't get the easy stuff right? And sex matters in some contexts. You know, I don't think it matters in every context. You know, if you're getting a raise at your job, that shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter to me if I'm making friends. You can be male or female. That doesn't matter to me. In most contexts, probably your sex shouldn't matter in social situations, but in some it does. And those contexts are, you know, women's sports, and women's protected spaces like prisons and bathrooms and things like that. So there are certain areas where it matters a lot, even if we can acknowledge that in most areas it probably doesn't matter and probably shouldn't matter. And it's confusing and harming children, as Chris really just showed extremely well. So I won't go into that too much. And you know, truth matters. These people say they're doing this because of social justice reasons. Well, you can't really have social justice. You can't have any justice that is divorced from truth. Okay, if someone is oppressed, they need to be able to say, who my oppressors are, what are the material basis of my oppression, so we can actually take steps to remedy that, and then know if we actually change the outcome. You know, so there has to be some sort of way we can keep track of reality that people are claiming that they're oppressed by. So I'm going to quickly go through some gender basics here. So we're leaving the realm of biology. That's just sort of what I want to ground you in, because that's reality. And so now we're going to sort of go far away from reality and talk about a lot of stuff that Chris talked about, but in sort of a more institutional way, I suppose. We're going to fly to the gender galaxy. This is a real thing that they teach in schools. And I've heard activists have told me about gender being a galaxy or a sort of a landscape or something. It's just right out of a children's book, and it's given to children. So I think gender is probably the most confusing word that we're using now in society. You know, I really didn't use it at all in this talk up until now, because I want to make sure that when I'm talking about someone's biological sex, people know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about their biology. When we talk about gender, you know, some people use it as a synonym for sex. Some people in my field of animal behavior, we might talk about gender as being, you know, your sex differences in behavior. Sometimes we'll use that. But there's another definition that people use. This is the one we'll focus on mostly, and that's that sex is your gender is your sex-related social role and the expectations that society has for you. So this isn't just some definition pulled out of some internet blog somewhere, not on Tumblr. I chose to show about the American Psychological Association. This is just one. This is literally every single scientific and medical institution in the US, in the West, really, uses the same definition. I just chose this one. So how are they defining gender? Well, gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for boys, men, girls, and women. Social roles and expectations. They try to separate gender from sex sometimes, but a lot of activists still go back and forth and use them interchangeably, just depending on what their goals are for the conversation. What they're trying to do is undermine sex, so they'll purposely kind of go back and forth if it furthers their argument and is enough to make you sort of give that deer in the headlights look. Planned Parenthood, these are just a few examples, so you know I'm not making these definitions up. They say that gender is, you know, apart from being a social and legal status, it's a set of expectations from society about behaviors, characteristics, and your thoughts. What is the gender binary? Well, they're not talking about the sex binary. Sometimes they are, because they go back and forth. But when they talk about the gender binary, let's see what Planned Parenthood says it is. The gender binary is the idea that gender is strictly an either-or option of male men masculine or female woman feminine based on your sex assigned at birth. Because remember, they don't think sex is real. They think that you're just assigned these things arbitrarily. And so the gender binary is those roles that they call man and woman, or male or female. They throw in the biology. They just mix it all up. This is a real slide that was used at a a trans charity in the UK called Mermaids, and they make it explicit about what the gender binary is here. This is the gender spectrum. And then on the left-hand side, they have a Barbie, and then they have a G.I. Joe representing what a man and a woman are. And then they have the entire gender spectrum in the middle. If you're not a Barbie or a G.I. Joe, you're by definition out of the binary, you're non-binary. This is where this comes from. This is when people say they're non-binary, they're saying they don't identify with those social roles and expectations that are associated with males or females, which they're stereotyping here as literal Barbie and a G.I. Joe. And there's women wearing jeans in this crowd. I don't see gowns, I don't see a lot of combat boots. So I mean, literally by their definition, everyone in this room is non-binary. You're trans. Because non-binary is a subset of being trans. Not making this up. So what is being transgender then? This is a slide that should really shock everyone with this definition. And again, this is the same definition used by the Endocrine Society, the CDC, every human rights scientific medical organization in the US. Transgender is an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or is doing a lot of work here, or behavior does not conform to that typically associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth, with their sex. Think about that for a second. If your gender expression, which they later say has to do with your mannerisms, your haircuts, these types of things, or your behavior. So if you're a tomboy, as Chris mentioned, a lot of people raised their hand when he asked how many tomboys were here. That's literally by definition you're transgender now. If you're a girl who cuts their hair short, well, that is a sort of behavior and a type of gender expression that is not typically associated with your sex. You're transgender. Again, I'm not quoting a blog, some weird internet forum that I had to hunt for. This is the American Psychological Association, and you can find this everywhere. It's pretty crazy. And just as if this reliance on stereotypes weren't clear enough, well, here's how the genderbread defines your gender identity for children. Tell me how this wouldn't confuse you. Your gender identity, is how you in your head experience and define your gender based on how much you align or don't align with what you understand the options for gender to be. What do you think kids think the options are gender to be in their mind? Well, it's going to be based on sort of the average behaviors that they're seeing, the stereotypes that they associate with their male and female friends, okay? And if the kids thought something else, well, they give some examples. Let's see. So your gender, sorry. Let me go back. Oh yeah, so they have your gender identity with the degree of womanness and manness that you are. We see on the bottom they have personality traits, jobs, hobbies, likes, dislikes, roles, and expectations. So they make it really clear if the kid was somehow not using stereotypes. And then again, when we talk about your gender expression, because remember, your gender expression, if that's atypical for your sex, that also makes you trans. Your gender expression, degrees of masculinity or femininity, style, grooming, clothing, mannerisms, affect, appearance, hair, and makeup. Okay, so literally, girls who cut their hair short, they're transgender now. So, quick overview. What it means to be a boy or a girl is now rooted in identity, expression, or behavior instead of biology. These identities, expressions, and behaviors are based on sex-related stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. Masculine girls and feminine boys are considered transgender by definition. And you might think at this point, what's really the harm in this? I mean, you're not thinking that because Chris just told you all the harms. Some people will say, well, language evolves. This is how we refer to being gender nonconforming now. Tomboys are just transgender. It's just a language change. There's no real harm in this. Well, there's a lot of harm because even though the terms have changed, so we used to refer to people being trans, that used to mean being transsexual. Okay, transsexualism before in the diagnostics of mental disorders, it involved that, intense hatred of your own genitals from a very young age. That was one out of 50,000 people that would be afflicted by this. That's what this used to mean. That's what being trans used to be. But now in just the last decade, the definition has changed to being literally synonymous with gender nonconformity, but the medicalization aspect has remained, okay? And so we're just medicalizing normal boys and girls who might just not fit these rigid sexist stereotypes. That's the danger. So a lot of you may have seen this graph. Chris might have even had it in his slide. This is the increase in kids who are being referred to gender clinics. This is, I think, from the UK Tavistock Clinic. And what we see is this, 20 to 40-fold rise over the last decade in kids who are claiming to have gender dysphoria, kids who think they're trans. A lot of people think that this is a big mystery. We hear this a lot, like this is unprecedented, nobody knows what's going on, we need to get to the root of this. Well, how about if we expand the definition of what it means to be transgender to include everyone in this room? Well, I'm shocked that it's not more than this. Because if we're just taking their definition and we're applying it to individuals, rather than waiting for them just to self-profess their identities, this applies to almost everyone in the country, except for Kim Kardashian and Randy Macho Man Savage, basically. Okay? So, pretty insane. The harms of this, we're just medicalizing gender nonconforming kids, as Chris pointed out really, really well in his talk. This really harms, I think, the gay and lesbian community a lot too, because they've actually redefined what it means to be gay. It's no longer being same-sex attracted, remember, because sex doesn't exist anymore. They now literally define being homosexual. I probably don't even use that word because it's got the word sex in it. But being gay now is being attracted to the same gender identity. This is why they think that you can be in a straight relationship, but one of them just sort of identifies as the opposite sex all of a sudden, and all of a sudden this is considered a gay relationship, even though they're opposite sex partners. So before there was, a widespread acceptance and normalization of the LGB, part of the LGBTQ groups. And, it doesn't really matter people's opinion on whether they like that, but it really risks sort of regressing away from this if the LGBs aren't separated from the TQ part. That is really just sort of applying their ideology back onto the other individuals. And a lot of organizations, there's one called Gays Against Groomers, they're specifically against this idea that, they're being reinterpreted. What it means to be gay is completely turned on its head. And so they think that a lot of their progress might be undone by people being put off by this crazy ideology. And I understand why. And this conflicts with sex-based rights. If anyone can just identify into any sex category, then you can't have sex-segregated spaces. You can't enforce any rights that have to do with your biological sex. It's also just sexist and regressive if we're literally now defining what it means to be a male or a female, a man or a woman, by the stereotypes that they adhere to. And as I said, the first half of this talk is rooted in pseudoscience. It's rooted in just people purposefully misunderstanding what it means to be male or female in order to use that as a wedge to push this insane agenda that's harming our kids. So that's the end. Thank you. I'm not sure how long that was, but I'll take questions. Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question. There is a lot of literature that suggests that girls tend to be more gender non-conforming in general. Now, what I think this is the sort of stereotype of femininity is much more rigid than masculinity. Some guy can just wake up out of the bed and have really messy hair and not do anything, and he's still comfortably within masculinity at that point. But the feminine stereotypes are extremely rigid, and girls just sort of more naturally fall out of this more rigid stereotype because it's easier to fall out of a more rigid stereotype than it is to be included in it. They're also more susceptible to things like social contagion. We can see with that with a lot of things like anorexia, with cutting, things like that. There's more tight-knit social groups. So I think there's just a kind of a perfect storm that's affecting the reason why we see so many more girls. But yeah, there's probably a lot of factors.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like this is almost a war on women. I mean, I don't know where the feminists are, because where does this leave women? You know, it leaves you powerless. And I think that feeds into your question. These girls are taught that women are abused or oppressed. You know, being a woman is a very disadvantageous thing, but being trans, turning yourself into a man, all of a sudden you're brave and you're a hero and you're wonderful. And so I think that more women need to realize that this is directly aimed at girls. You know,
Yeah.
and you can see it in the statistics. It's aimed at girls, and it's hurting girls disproportionately.
This is the angle that I try to take in when I try to convince, because I'm sort of an ex-lefty. I came from, and I was a liberal left-wing person. I voted Democrat my entire life. And I try to use their values against them. I try to show people how, well, if you're for women's rights, I wrote an article that said you can't claim to be for women's rights if you don't know what a woman is. Okay, they claim to be, you know, this women's rights platform, but they can't even, they won't even say it. They even will change the words that Ruth Bader Ginsburg used when she talked about, you know, a woman's right to an abortion or something. And they'll literally, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg used the word woman and she in their quote, and the ACLU literally edited out every time they said, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said woman and she, they changed it to they or them.
So that was my question. Where are the feminists?
Yeah,
where are the women?
You know, that's what I try to do, to get people to understand that this ideology, you know, it's masquerading as sort of this next civil rights, human rights thing, but it's anything but. It goes against everything that a lot of those left-wing feminists claim to have fought for over the, you know, the last several decades. So it doesn't seem to be working.
I have a slightly different question. What is happening to the medical community? Because if this is fact, then we have peaked on all knowledge, all medicine, all cures, all everything. If we can't even define what the sexes are, I can't imagine what this does to medical research or any improvements. And could you comment just a moment on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a push to remove sex from birth certificates so that you won't even be able to have sex markers on any medical documentation whatsoever. But simultaneously, there's also research going on about the need for sex-segregated research and, you know, sex-specific medicine. This is sort of going on the side there, while all this other stuff is just sort of cropping up to nullify it completely. I speak to a lot of medical professionals who reach out, and they can't really say anything about this stuff. I mean, the ones who do just get shot down immediately. It is an enormous scandal that's going on right now. I mean, we know that there are sex differences in the way that certain ailments affect people, you know, heart attacks being a major one. You know, there's a lot of different symptoms for how, you know, if you're a male having a heart attack, the symptoms what you need to look out for are much different than if you're a female. And, you know, there's been examples of, you know, a trans man, so a biological female, going to the doctor with complaints about stomach pains, who didn't divulge the fact that they were biologically female. Well, it turns out they were pregnant, but they didn't divulge this to the doctors. And the fetus ended up dying because of this whole process, because it was somehow too dysphoric of them to divulge this important medical information that it resulted in the death of their baby. I mean, biology matters a lot in some contexts. It's the most important thing you can focus on. Oh, the O? Yeah, the O, it's a good question. So when you see what they call them karyotypes, is the types of sex chromosomes that you have, you'll see like XX and XY, and he commented this up on the slide, I had one of those XO. That just means that you didn't get another X chromosome. So there's just no paired X chromosome for it. It's just a stand-in for nothing. So you're just a person who has just one X chromosome instead of two. So they're still biologically female. They have other issues with their development because they don't have like the two copies that are helping their development. So they have, they have a disorder of sex development, but they're still 100% female. So that's what the O means. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, my question is, what do you think the motivating forces are behind all of this? These scientists that should know better, they have years and years and degrees behind them. What's caused all this craziness? Again, I'm talking about motivating forces, not people being afraid, that type of thing. Who's pushing this?
It's being pushed from the top down, well, and inside from other, really people's colleagues. So there's a lot of mutual policing going on in the academy. Like as soon as I started talking about this stuff and just making basic claims about biology, they swarmed hard. They went, you're a bigot, you're a transphobe, all this stuff. People wrote emails to jobs that I was applying for. People wrote on job boards where thousands of scientists are going posting jobs that are available so the community can apply. Well, some people post, a job that just said Colin Wright is a transphobe and a race scientist or something, even though I don't comment on that. Just throw out the racism card too. They'll do anything to get you exiled from academia. And there's this really big sunken cost fallacy that a lot of academics have. Sometimes your community is very tight-knit. In my field, I studied animal personalities. There weren't many people who were doing that. And so if you get ostracized from it, well, good luck getting people to sign on grants with you. Good luck finding collaborators. It takes a lot to get a PhD in biology, and you're just going to risk that all for a couple tweets that you do or an essay that you write that you're just really passionate about. Like, people aren't going to do that. I've had friends, other grad students who were my best friends in grad school, and they said they disagreed with me, and I was like, okay, you can disagree. But then they said that their colleagues were messaging them because they noticed that we had co-authored papers together on spiders and ants and wasps. And they were asking them about their opinions of me because we were co-authors. And they felt that they would have some serious damage to their career if they didn't actually denounce me. So this is just their colleagues. I mean, any normal person would say, if they didn't agree with me, we just co-authored a paper on spiders. I disagree with him on that, but we just collaborated on spiders that had nothing to do with anything else. That's it. But no, he said he needed to go on social media to denounce me, did a whole big thread about, Colin Wright is, he's parroting these bigoted things. It's not enough just to not agree. They have to just sort of do these public denunciations. And that really showed me the sort of Maoist struggle session nature to this, because the colleagues were policing his thoughts. They were asking him about our relationship, and he thought that his career would be severely hurt just by co-authoring a paper on spiders with me. So there's just a lot of social factors going in.
Do you think they have an end goal? Again, it seems like this is organized, and it seems like they have a goal to put people like yourself, that are truth tellers out of business. Is there you mentioned Maoist. Do you think that there's a communist space to this, or what would your thoughts on that be?
Yeah, I think there's some definite people who are out communists, but I think most of the people just sort of go along with it because that's just what their colleagues do. They don't want to get canceled. And a lot of the scientists too they're super nerds. They don't even know what's going on. They just keep their heads down. They just want to poke the bugs. They just want to do these weird gene replacements. They don't care about anything social. Most of them just don't even know what's happening. And then, they're not the ones that show up to the, department meetings who set the agendas for, the politics within the departments. And the people who sign up for those are going to be the ones who care more about the activism components of it. And so they tend to just take control of everything. And the hiring process is a really big issue here too, because you need to fill out these sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion, statements now when you apply for any job. And I was specifically asked when I was applying for jobs as a professor, how my research on the behavior of wasps contributes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's just like, it doesn't. It really, there's just no possible angle I can do, and I'm not going to try to fake it. And so there's just not a route for a lot of people who are just trying to do good science anymore. They're being filtered out on the first step of the application process because they didn't do a good enough DEI statement going in there. And then they use these DEI statements not just when you get hired, but for promotions. Are you going for tenure? Are you going to get a raise? They try to re-look at these things and find out, how much are you sort of, kissing the emblem on the gown. Yeah, it's a really big issue. The whole pipeline problem is completely messed up. It's even affecting graduate school now. Grad students talk about how they need to do these DEI statements just to get into grad school. And it's the same with med school, and the same with law school. It's a systemic issue.
Hi, I just have a comment, actually. I don't know how many of you are in the 50-year age range, but I remember in the 80s learning, do you remember any of you doing that program in class where they would say, there are some people that need to get from the land to the island or whatever. There was a priest, and it was all moral relativism way back then. And I just had this little epiphany. I'm sure everyone has had it before. I did right now. But I'm just thinking to myself, my goodness, they started this way back when I was a kid. And I remember my mother saying, this is bad. This is going nowhere good. But as a kid, I just thought, oh, Mom, just be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. Everyone else is agreeing to go along with this activity. But the truth is, I think this started way before that. But I remember that activity, and I remember growing up having to come up with those moral dilemmas. And this is where it has gotten us to upend the truths into things not being true anymore. Everything is relative. I only worry about where it's going to go after that, but that's something that just popped into my head.
No, exactly. That's where I saw it first, too, is in the whole moral relativism. In reality, these ideas, they have like this postmodern basis, basically, which is sort of this relativistic truth idea. It started a long time ago in the academy. James Lindsay was here a couple weeks ago, and he goes into the foundations of where these ideologies come from. I tend to just deal with them as they're manifesting in the world today, and I don't focus too much on where they came from. There was an instance in the sciences when this postmodern stuff was taking over. If you look up what were called the science wars, but it was mainly in physics, and there was a guy named Alan Sokal who did what was called the Sokal hoax, and he decided that he was going to try to hoax one of these journals that are publishing this nonsense, this sort of relativistic truth in the field of physics, and so he just wrote this nonsense paper, submitted it to this, this prestigious journal that was doing this postmodern stuff, and he exposed them. The paper got accepted, and then after it was accepted, he came out and said, this was a hoax paper. So he really showed that their whole discipline was just this naked emperor, and yeah, so that they did the same thing. But what's different now, though, is so back then that actually worked. And that ideology was laughed out of the scientific departments that it was in. It was very successful. It really exposed everything. But it's sort of morphed and evolved now, where we're seeing the same sort of postmodern relativistic truth things happening now, but they've sort of thrown the rainbow flag over them as armor. And so now you're not just some crank who has bad ideas. You're a crank who has bad ideas, and you're also a bigot. You also hate gay people. You also are a transphobe, etc. And so a lot of people, there's a huge social cost now, because they're using sort of the LGBT community as a human shield for this ideology. So it's a brilliant move, and it's working really, really well. So we just need it's going to take time for people to decouple the rainbow flag with like everything that's good in the world. This is sort of an immediate association a lot of people, especially on the left, have about this, is that don't criticize the rainbow people, even if they're saying males and females don't exist.
My question was, how have you seen this come into textbooks? If this pseudoscience is now kind of a fact in scientific journals and really respected papers, is it taught as a fact in, anatomy and biology and physiology and all of these other classes that now would trickle down into high school and things like that? What kind of effects is that going to have on fact?
I actually haven't seen college textbooks yet. I'm sure there's been some changes, because I know that Nature, if you talk about biological sex in the journal Nature, they will editorially put in this parenthesis that, sex and gender are both social constructs and non-binary, that type of thing. So the editors will do that. They'll put that into your own words if you're submitting a paper to Nature and you talk about biological sex. This is mainly, I think, happening in kids. I mean, whenever they get a lecture on biology, they'll bring up, they're talking about what sex is. They'll talk about how sex is a spectrum, it's a social construct. They'll bring up clownfish as examples in nature of sex can be fluid, because clownfish can change their sex. And they sort of make kids think that, oh, clownfish can do this, therefore humans can too. It's everywhere. If you look up things like gender-inclusive classrooms, this is sort of how it gets in the curriculum. This is taught in things like rainbow clubs on campuses. A lot of people don't know GSA clubs. They used to stand for Gay Straight Alliance. Now it's the Gender and Sexuality Alliance clubs. So they've changed the name without changing the acronym, so people don't really realize that. But they're teaching this stuff in there. They'll use, when you talk in English class about pronouns, well, we'll just talk about gender in there. It's a good place to start these conversations about sex and gender. It used to be sort of in this anti-bullying curriculum is where it was mostly there. And that was something that, people can't opt out on, like the anti-bullying. So they really they insert it there, they insert it in biology class, they insert it in English. Anywhere it can probably be inserted, they put it there. So I'll need to check actual college textbooks, but if it's in Nature and it's in kids' books, it's going to be in the college books too.
Chris had talked about before the 400% increase in 4,000% increase in girls. And then you also talked about the aspect of 50% are maybe autistic. I know the spectrum has changed over the years, but is it not true that the spectrum for boys for autism is so much greater than it is for girls? How do you divvy that out?
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I know there's different diagnoses, or different ways that they diagnose autism in males and females. I'll hand this over quickly to...
Just quickly. I have Asperger's. I was late diagnosed. Not until I was about 30, I think. For years and years, people believed that autism was a boy's diagnosis. The ratio used to be they used to believe it was about 4 males to every 1 female. Now they're finding out that it's much more even, but the diagnostic criteria for autism diagnosis was written for boys. So a lot of girls would fly under the radar like I did, like a lot of the detransitioned girls that I've talked to. They're all discovering now that they actually have autism. It presents differently. And what we really need is like a lot of more attention on this topic, so that girls can get the diagnosis the proper diagnosis. I mean, when I was a teenager, I struggled with my identity a lot. I was trying on all kinds of different diagnoses. I knew that I was different. I had a lot of problems, like self-harm, hospitalization for suicide attempts. This is the same thing that most of these adolescent girls are dealing with now. And a lot of the reason is because they're not being properly diagnosed. They know they're different. They get introduced to gender ideology. They think this is the explanation I've been looking for. This is going to solve all my problems. It was just that I was born in the wrong body. But that's basically what we've been dealing with now. Then now the newest research, 2022, is saying that the ratio is much more even than we originally thought.
Awesome. I'll also add too that we do know from research that girls who have Asperger's, who are also on the autism spectrum, they tend to be more gender nonconforming. They tend to have more male typical interests and likes. They're more things oriented versus people oriented. And so this is, why we see autism just widely overrepresented in girls too, because those are the ones that are gender nonconforming. Those are the ones that fit this umbrella definition of transgender more accurately.
This has been very helpful to me. I didn't know the term gametes, and now I've found. But anyway, if God set up the world with two sets of gametes, different, isn't it all about the breakdown of the nuclear family? I mean, I think that's the end game. The government knows better than the father and mother and the kids can reproduce themselves into other families. Could you say about that?
I mean, that is a big concern for me as well. I mean, we see a lot of organizations, I know BLM is one of them, that they specifically have in their tenets sort of this destruction of the nuclear family. And Planned Parenthood, they actually had, I need to remember that they had some agenda items decades ago, and one of them was sort of this destruction of the nuclear family, all this stuff. And these were their action items. And I don't know what happened to that document, but they've really just sort of been implementing them ever since. And even though most people who are probably at your local Planned Parenthood, they're probably not Marxist themselves. They're just sort of going along with what the ideology says. It's just much easier to go along with this than to push back. And so, the consequence is still, if you're going along with this, it doesn't matter if you believe it, you're still a soldier for it. And so they are, I think, sort of destroying the sort of nuclear family idea. Yeah. Anyone else?
Got all these books, and are the parents just oblivious to it, just too busy? I just don't know. I mean, he's done something about it, but there should be thousands of like that.
I mean, a lot of parents they don't know what's going on. They assume that the institutions are working as they should. They assume their kids aren't being taught crazy things. When people like me, that's one of the most difficult things of what I'm doing, is because I literally just quote the stuff from the APA, but it sounds like I'm like a tinfoil hat person. Like, they're saying sex doesn't exist. They don't think, you sound like a crazy person, especially because when I say, don't trust the APA, don't trust all our institutions, like, that's what crazy people say. And so what is it like your average parent to do when they're like, do the research? Well, then they go to the Nature magazine, they go to all the institutions that have this, they're credentializing institutions, they have this air of being credible, but you can't trust them now because they've been taken over by this ideology. And then there's some parents who are just all in. I mean, we've infiltrated a lot of these Facebook groups, the parents of trans and non-binary kids. And so a lot of times parents will, their kid will come home, I'm a boy or I'm non-binary, their girl might say that they're a boy. And so they don't know what to do, they're horrified. They find a Facebook group that says, here's a Facebook group for parents of trans and non-binary teens. And they go there, and it's just one massive indoctrination session. If the parent is not immediately using their kids' cross-sex pronouns or gender-neutral pronouns, they get mobbed by people. And we've written articles about this too, little case studies where a mom will enter the chat just being pretty ignorant and pretty concerned, and by their third reply is just, okay, my daughter's a boy now, and they just get led down this garden path, and sometimes they end with their daughters getting their double mastectomies, and we've written about this. So parents are they're either all on board, they don't know what's going on, or they're like all you here who know what's going on and doing what they can to push back against it. Yeah, if you then what does a good parent do when their kid is expressing this stuff? Well, let's take you to a therapist. Well, therapists are really not allowed in some places to do anything besides gender affirming therapy, and so they just start indoctrinating your kid right away. So even your parental instinct of I'm going to take my kid to the doctor, you can't even trust that anymore. They really just have all the institutions captured. It's completely nuts. Conversion therapy, yeah.
So what is the modern definition of conversion therapy? Is that just therapy?
So conversion therapy, so this is a good question, because conversion therapy was previously conceived when it referred to trying to change a kid's or even an adult's sexual orientation. And that's usually not able to happen. There's been, a lot of times they would use things like shock therapy, and so there's, it's pretty horrific, and it's a widely discredited practice of actually trying to change a kid or an adult's sexual orientation. They're now using, so there was a lot of bills, a lot of laws that were passed in states making conversion therapy illegal, and so what they're doing now with the whole gender thing is they're just sort of including gender identity in these laws alongside of sexual orientation. And they define conversion therapy for gender identity as trying to change their gender identity to something other than they identify as. So just you telling your son or daughter that they're not the opposite sex, you're trying to convert them. This is conversion therapy. This is going to be outlawed. This is what a lot of the laws in Canada are used to take the kids away from their parents, because the parents are trying to do conversion therapy on them. Okay? But then there's another issue, because you have some therapists who know that gay conversion therapy is illegal, and it's also illegal to do gender conversion therapy, but we know that most of these really gender nonconforming kids are themselves gay. And so this leaves the therapists in a bind, saying like, well, if I go along with changing their gender identity, then I'm turning a kid who would grow up to be gay into a straight person, so then they'd be violating the rules against conversion therapy for homosexuality. But if they don't do that, then they can be, they can come after them for gender conversion therapy. So it's like a heads I win, tails you lose situation for some doctors. So that's a move you'll see, because again, conversion therapy is associated with people's minds as being like, oh, this horrible thing, and so it gets widespread support. I think it just passed in Canada, unanimously, didn't it? Like from both the right and left-wing governments there. Yeah, and so it's all a big language game. I mean, my talk I did on biology, it's all a language game. It's all using sex and gender interchangeably. It's using conversion therapy to apply to things that makes absolutely no sense to apply to. So we just need to be able to call out the language games they're playing whenever we can see it, because, the sunlight is the disinfectant here. These people don't want to talk out in the open about this stuff, because when they're exposed, as we saw in Matt Walsh's documentary, they just turn into gibbering fools. And so they've sort of taken over a lot because they've gone so long under the radar. And so this is sort of what we need to do now, is just make them speak publicly about this stuff. Make them defend their views publicly, because that's going to be the best way to end this whole thing, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. It's me, I'm back. So we've heard from a dad, a mad dad, and we've heard from a scientist. But I know what the question is, kind of from my aspect as a chapter chair, is what you want to know is, but is it here? To what degree is it right here in Williamson County? And I guess that falls to me to answer it. This is what it feels like to answer it. When you start looking at GLSEN and the GSAs and the Prison Club and Rainbow Clubs, and it's just this big murky mess, trying to sort it out is no easy feat. But I took a stab at it. Here it goes. Now, Dr. Wright talked about that one graphic where they made it more complex than it needed to be, just to kind of scare you off from trying to understand it. This one's missing about half the lines, because it didn't want you all to just run for the door. All right? But I'll speak to those, and we're going to step through these. I promise I'm not going to spend like 10 minutes on each one, but to tell you what the general breakdown is, here at the top, those are world organizations. I'm only missing one, the World Health Organization, one that I know of. And we'll start there. And then it flows down from them. These are more national level organizations, either federally funded, part of the federal government, or just had a lot of money. Then in this middle part, these are all national as well, but highly activist organizations. And then down here at the bottom, this is Williamson County. These are all things that are in Williamson County minus the Rainbow Clubs. And then you'll be interested to see how all of these just connect to Vanderbilt. All of their websites. Give a little shout out to Vanderbilt. Hey, send your kid to Vanderbilt. Get a double mastectomy. So we're running low on time, so I'm going to march through these pretty quick. Just try to hang with me. So yeah, United Nations, UNESCO, through UNESCO, same as through with social emotional learning, it pushes this stuff through UNESCO. And that can also explain why so many businesses and corporations feel the need to support this. World Health Organization has a whole paper on gender identity and genetics. Of course they do. Okay, you've heard we heard Boston Children's in those videos, they talked about WPATH. And Vanderbilt also talks about WPATH, it's on their website, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. I got that right. That is where the standards of care come from. It's like all of these crazy children's hospitals are doing these crazy things on minors. And again, it's not law. They can deviate, and they do. But the standards of care come from WPATH, and it filters down through US Path. And you see the logos for Asia Path and EPATH for the European countries. This is the standards of care, and they all march by this. And it's like 66 pages long. And you can see that it specifically has chapter 6 on adolescents, chapter 7 on children, and then chapter 13 on surgery and postoperative care. Now we're down to the national level. The White House, as Dr. Wright just talked about, the White House has plenty of initiatives and executive orders and memorandums about gender identity and trans care. And I said the White House because we know Biden's not really running things. Moving on over to the U.S. Department of Education. So there was a president not too long ago that was totally aware of what he was doing when he appointed Kevin Jennings as the Safe School Czar. So Kevin Jennings started, and by the way, when they say these GSAs are student-led, student-started, yeah, the first one was started by a teacher. He started the first GSA. Then he founded GLSEN, which we'll get into. And he wrote the foreword for a book called Queering Elementary Education. He was not shy about talking about his activism and his views on things. He had no problem with the sexualization of children. He had no problem with pedophilia. He had no problem with illicit drug use and alcoholism. It's all there. And he was supported by the NEA, Planned Parenthood, and others. So you can see these headlines from at that time. The 53 Republicans said he should be fired. It was in the news. The bottom graphic talks about the crazy things that he said. He was part of Fistgate, where GLSEN held a conference that handed out little toolkits and instructions for high schoolers how to fist. He was also tied to a bunch of really age-inappropriate library books with the caliber of which by now we are all quite familiar with. And, but GLSEN was thrilled. They congratulated their founder, Kevin Jennings, on being part of the US DOE. And boy, did he work while he was there. Now, GLSEN's quite happy about Miguel Cardona. So if you look at current, their resources, intersex students, Dear Educator letter about Title IX, they're doing the Title IX rewrite. And Cardona, very recently wrote an op-ed, "The time is now to affirm in every way we can." But there's some language after that, but everybody knows in the current climate what affirm means. Here's some more documentation put out by the DOE. Moving on to the CDC. So Centers for Disease Control, we all know they collaborated with the NEA to keep schools shut. Well, they're also collaborating with GSAs, and they're giving a lot of money for, quote, schools to start student-led groups. So about roughly to the tune of $85 million. And when you look at this, it's straight from their website. They have significance for schools, parents, and healthcare providers when dealing with the a transgender child. But if you read what it says about schools, this is all the schools the steps that the schools can take. Steps to affirm, to provide or refer students to comprehensive affirming sexual health services, oftentimes without telling the parent in some states. Basically, all the parent can do is seek out resources so they can understand and accept it. The parent has no right to stand in the way, according to the CDC. Moving on. So over here on the spaghetti diagram, there's the Human Rights Campaign. And as we march through these, as we start to get into this middle part here, you're going to see these logos pop up again and again and again. It's a very tangled web, and they all feed each other. So Human Rights Campaign, very active. They're one of the logos that pops up on everything. Even local Williamson County clubs link to the Human Rights Campaign. So they're starting to talk about neo-pronouns, good, sign me up for that. But also to the transgender sports, that's not playing well for them in the media right now, so I'm seeing a lot of stuff on their websites trying to refute it. But the Human Rights Campaign, from what I can tell, is heavily involved in ranking these hospitals with an HEI ranking. They give point scores. So when you go back and look at Johns Hopkins, which is now one of the most egregious child mutilating centers, for many years under their director, they didn't do that. They had a transgender program, but they answered the psychological needs of the students first before suggesting hormonal and surgical options. Well, that guy got fired. Why did he get fired? Partly because they instituted the point system. And Johns Hopkins was going to get a massive point deduction with him as the director, so bye-bye. And then they got their point rating, and off they are to the races. So these two articles currently on their website is talking about why they downgraded by 25 points 2 different children's hospitals. And then they talk about why. And the 2 articles are really carbon copies of each other. They downgraded their HEI scores because they are denying necessary and medically approved care to transgender youth while continuing the same care for cisgender youth. And then this is a carbon copy. It's like a cookie cutter paragraph, but it says, sexual orientation and gender identity are real concepts recognized by American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, American Psychological Association, and so on, just like Dr. Wright was talking about. So they've co-opted these professional associations to give themselves backup and ammunition when they're going to downgrade a children's hospital for exercising good judgment. And for some reason, these hospitals are really worried about that. So what does that lead to? Oh, by the way, they talk about downgrading Mercy San Juan. Well, it's a Catholic hospital, and as such follows religious directives, one of which does not allow for the direct sterilization of either men or women. But they downgraded them anyway. It doesn't matter. So that kind of environment, what does it breed? Mutilation centers like those. While we're talking about it, let's talk about Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's all been in the news. I don't need to go into the details. We had the rally to end child mutilation here quite recently. Went to Vanderbilt's website. Oh, look, WPATH right there. They also have a little shout out for PFLAG. And we'll get into that one shortly. Planned Parenthood, of course. Of course, Planned Parenthood is in on the action, and I included at the top the International Planned Parenthood Federation because they also have a world component. Of course they do. And by the way, we are slowly working down this chart to Williamson County, going as fast as I can. But it's a lot to get through. This is probably 30 hours of my life that I'll never get back. Doing the research, digging through the websites, hundreds of screenshots, making the diagram, while my husband is snoring next to me. So blissfully while I'm working on this. Thank you. So, that brings us to Southern Poverty Law Center. They're over here. They're not connected to a ton of them, but should you try to talk your child out of it, well, the Southern Poverty lawsuit might come after you for conversion therapy. That's their jam on this agenda. And then you come up with the ACLU, right? So this is on their website currently, Gender Affirming Care on Trial. They're pretty worked up about that. And they say through litigation, lobbying, public education, organizing, they want to carry their agenda forward. So what ACLU is going to do is come after the Florida Board of Medicine for denying gender affirming care, just like they're doing to Arkansas right now. And if Tennessee is successful in passing litigation, it'll have to be written as such that the ACLU can't poke holes in that one either. More from the ACLU, the trans pledge. They're pretty worked up about the trans athletes, how that's not going well for them, so that's about to be a battle. Moving on, the National Education Association. They, years ago, partnered with the ACLU and GLSEN and, no, it's not GLSEN, the Human Rights, see the Human Rights logo coming up again? To write Schools in Transition, a guide for supporting transgender students in K through 12 schools. They are all over this as well. And if you go to their website, boom, there it is for Tennessee. They have a little shout out to Vanderbilt Children's Child Mutilation Clinic and PFLAG, which we're coming to. So on to GLSEN. GLSEN is a big one. As you explore this spaghetti web of a mess, GLSEN is in almost every single circle. Every single web page has some kind of link to GLSEN. And it stands for, oh, I didn't write it down. What does it stand for? No, I did write it down. See, I have to have a cheat sheet for all of these acronyms. Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, GLSEN. And they say, we don't sweat, we glisten. But you go to their website, it's chock full of stuff. One of the more recent ones is informing the federal agenda for LGBTQI+ data inclusion, which is data mining. That was a disturbing one to read. Activate supportive educators. Gee, that sounds like activist teachers, which it is. They're pretty happy about Miguel Cardona. And then you have a whole list, like a toolkit for educators for their activist teachers. And I thought this one was really interesting. One brick at a time, building inclusive classrooms with Lego and GLSEN. And they have a special Pride Lego blocks for it and a special activity. So this is, the question has been raised by a few people in here. How does it get into the schools? Is it going through curriculum, textbooks? How exactly? Well, the answer is all of the above, but some of them in such insidious ways that you would never guess that a Lego exercise is going to include gender identity. But here's how it goes. They give them a set of 6 bricks with all the different colors, explain that we all have an identity. Our identities are what make us who we are, and special and should be celebrated. Right at the parts of identity, gender is suggested. Ask students to assign parts of the identity to the Lego bricks they feel each color represents. Inform students they can build their tower any way they want to. This is like for the kindergarten or early elementary education. That is how it gets in, very sneakily, especially in a state like Tennessee. So on the GLSEN website, they're telling you how to set up your GSA, which, as Dr. Wright pointed out, is not Gay Straight Alliance, is Gender Sexuality Alliance now. One thing that I screenshot, and I thought this was really interesting, every time you go to the GLSEN website, this little pop-up comes up, leave this site safely. What does that mean? And so basically, I did what the pop-up suggests. I hit escape 3 times, and it took me to the Google. So, or in any window that you click on the GLSEN website, there's this little pink button, and you click on it, it takes you back to Google, which I assume is for a child, a minor, looking around on this website. Oh, mom's coming in. And then, it's just Googling for homework, it's no big deal. And then the same pop-up suggests you clear your cache frequently. So it's vilified parents. It works against parents in every possible way. This is GLSEN in Tennessee. So if you're wondering if it's here, yeah, it's absolutely here. And then GLSEN, their whole point, one of their main missions is to get you to start a GSA. So, and of course, these are all billed, especially in Williamson County, they're billed as student-led clubs. And why would we take that away from the students? But this is a national network with assets of over $2 million. And it's also, I found this was interesting, thinking about online safety to youth in unsupportive homes. So again, it's against the parents. And it talks about identifying the safe and brave spaces in your home, your in-home allies. Bridge the gaps by putting your headphones on and staying in social media. By the way, if you're part of our book club, reading Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, there's a very high percentage of, especially the girls, right before they decided that they were a boy and they wanted to transition, they spend an inordinate amount of time burning their retinas in social media. So GSA Network is telling you, put your headphones on, spend some time in social media. And also to create intentional time alone, which also in that same book, it talks about how our kids are already alone. That can explain the increase in suicidality. And then you slap COVID on top of that. But adolescence, as we know it, apparently is long gone. Like those movies in the 80s with Fast Times at Ridgemont High where students were hanging out and doing stupid things together. Apparently that doesn't happen so much. Apparently the kids are by themselves with a social media device immersing themselves in ideology and predators on the internet. So it's telling them to have more time alone. That's the last thing that they need. I turned to my husband last week and I'm like, I'm gonna organize a slumber party. He said, why? I'm like, because we need to build our daughter's girl network now. She's 8, but I'm starting now. And she's never getting a smartphone. So on the GSA network, again, student-led, it's all student-led, it's good. They have a manifesto, a 9-point manifesto. And I knew that would be impossible to read, so I typed it, I boiled it down, I typed it out for you. It takes cues from the Black Panther 10-point program, the Young Lords 12-point program, and the Third World Gay Revolution. It talks about self-determination and control of our destinies. Tell me, who in the world controls their destiny? Abolition of police, ICE, borders, and the judicial system, transformative justice, and talks about a collective. Ending the patriarchy from those awful white heteronormative males. Decolonization and reparations, free non-compulsory critical theory education, reclamation of stolen lands, end global white supremacy, and an invitation to comrades to join the revolution. Right. I'm pretty sure a high schooler wrote that. They also have summer camp. Did you know? This one is for queer youth leading the South. Now, if you look at these websites, there are multiple special areas of their website where they're focusing on the South. Tennessee is prime time target. So a whole action camp for focusing on the South, and the 5 original sponsor states are Arkansas, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Well, what are they learning at this camp? Well, there it is. What do we learn at camp? Racial justice, white supremacy, gender justice and patriarchy, economic justice and capitalism. It's just dismantling our entire country, that's all. And then, you know, for GSA, Trans and Queer Youth United for Racial and Gender Justice, and then every GSA has its own logo. You know, we tangled with the GSA last year when we had objections for handing out pride flyers to elementary kids and for displays for basically PDA in front of elementary kids. That's where we took objection. And man, did those GSAs turn out in force to decry our transphobia and our homophobia. And how dare they take away, or we take away their GSAs because they're so supporting and they need it for their emotional safe spaces and whatnot. But I'm sorry, the GSA was not written by a high schooler. That's not about safe spaces when it has racial and gender justice all over it. It's about something else entirely, masquerading as all of these things do. So what's an example of a high school GSA? Well, the University School of Nashville made the news, which we caught on to and read about. And if you go to their external resources, boom, PFLAG, GLSEN, the Oasis Center. That's something that I skipped intentionally, but it's here in Nashville. Human rights campaign, again, Trevor Project, CDC, Johns Hopkins, and the Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, and the Trans Buddy program. And I don't think you can read that up there, but the Trans Buddy program, that's a Matt Walsh tweet talking about, well, Vanderbilt will send a trans activist to all your students' appointments or all your child's appointments with them to make sure that the doctor doesn't commit any pronoun faux pas or maybe try to diagnose the true reason that they're there. So it's really monitoring. Which brings me, you guys, which we're down here now, Prism Clubs. That has become an issue this year. And looking around on the internet, you can see Glencrest Middle School, Kenya Park Middle School, oh, by the way, Grassland Middle School. They're all popping up this year. 2022 to 23 is the inaugural year. There are no coincidences with this ideology. It is marching into middle schools, and it's marching into a middle school right here. And this is the flyer. It made news. Has everybody seen this flyer going around? So when you look at Prism Club, it doesn't actually say anything about polyamory. But on that flyer it did. It had the polyamory flag, which basically means multiple sexual partners for middle school. So the Grassland Middle School added a little extra flavor to the Prism Club, which needed an extra kick, I guess, and they added polyamory. And there it is on the school's website. It doesn't mention anything about polyamory, but you know, they're going to strive to make Grassland Middle a more supportive place. It's all very innocent. Prism Clubs, I thought this was interesting. Take some digging to find out, what does PRISM stand for? Power, resistance, and identity in STEM education. You're sending science, technology, engineering, math through a prism, and out the other side comes critical social and gender justice. And if you notice at the top of that logo, top right, it's Vanderbilt. Teach for America. They're a big proponent of PRISM alliances. Who's also a big part of Teach for America? Oh, our very own Commissioner of Education in Tennessee. She's done us so much good. Everybody is a huge, I mean, even the liberals don't like her. And that's a whole other thing. So here we go, partnership, GLSEN, Teach for America, and the Trevor Project partnered to create safe classrooms. And if you go to the Teach for America resources list, there it is, GLSEN, suggested readings, you know, the GSAs by default, the Trevor Project, they all the same logos keep popping up. And then you come to gender inclusive classrooms, oh man, which is right over here on the diagram. did Teach for America. I'm going as fast as I can. It's like, it took me 30 hours to get through this. You guys could sit through 20 minutes.
Who wrote that article on the right there? Colin, right?
Yep. Well, because I'm now a subscriber to Reality's Last Stand, which is Colin Wright's Substack, and he is the one that pointed me on to gender-inclusive classrooms. I would never have known to look at it. But what are they pushing? Rainbow clubs. What's a rainbow club? It's a GSA for elementary kids. Now, my daughter, if she sees a rainbow in any form, right, shoes, shirts, whatever, her eyes are just big as saucers, and she loves it. Loves rainbows, sparkles, glitter. And if you put a rainbow club in an elementary school, she'd be all over it. And that's the whole point. And so basically, Colin Wright and Christina Buttons attended their little webinar for rainbow clubs, and that article exposes the whole thing. And basically, bottom line is what's said in Rainbow Club stays in Rainbow Club. Or the first rule of Rainbow Club is you don't talk about Rainbow Club, not to the parents. And they give specific resources for talking around the issue to the parents, because it's all parents are the enemy. We're the gatekeepers. You got to get around us, outsmart us, because we're not very smart. And then here's an example of one that exists at an elementary school. I found records of rainbow clubs or on their website in New York and California, of course. But if we have a Prism Club here, do you not think that a rainbow club doesn't follow in 2 years? It absolutely does. And the parents of Williamson County have to stand up now, because you cannot put that toothpaste back in the tube. Once it's here, it's here. So the parents of Grassland Middle are going to have to come together and make a stand and stop it in its tracks, because if they don't, it'll be in every single middle school. So I'm sorry, Grassland parents, that it comes to you. There's a lot of stuff going on at Grassland, but I hope and pray that they'll make a stand, and we at Moms for Liberty are here to support in any way that we can. Otherwise, it'll be rainbow schools at Grassland Elementary, if there's a Grassland Elementary. Okay. So when you start looking around on the Gender Inclusive Classrooms website, they have, that's only the top fourth of the page, massive selections of gender inclusive curriculum. So yes, it can come in through Legos, it comes in through curriculum, and it comes in through suggested gender inclusive reading books. Now, I know for a fact that there was a parent of a kindergartner that went to the first orientation of school this year, looked at what the classroom books were for that teacher, and then disenrolled their child right then and there. And God bless them for it, because it was all about gender stuff. And that's criminal to push that on a kindergartner, and that parent knows that. But here it is, suggestions, toolkits, resources, and a checklist for gender inclusive schools. So I mentally kind of went through the checklist for Williamson County Schools. Where are we at on this? Teacher language, are we using preferred pronouns? Yes, we absolutely are. Books, yeah, absolutely. We've got pornographic books in the library, and we've got gender books in the classrooms. And those are not kept in any database anywhere. You're just gonna have to go to the classroom to see them. What else? Signage and posters. Well, at Bethesda Elementary, there's 4 elementary classrooms with pride flags in them. And there's a parent that took issue with that and requested that their child be removed from that classroom. They're not even making a stink. They're not even saying you have to take it down. They're just, hey, can you move my kid to a classroom that doesn't have a pride flag that they're gonna stare at all day long? WCS said, nope, pound sand. Tough. So yeah, there is signage and posters and images in the classrooms. There's been a lot of rumors about bathroom procedures. And it interestingly says curriculum for social justice. Well, we've got wit and wisdom, check. So we're about halfway on that checklist. So when you start looking at the links from the gender inclusive classrooms, it's all the usual suspects. Except I thought this was interesting because they kind of created some shell organizations here. Because if it's 2 in the morning and I'm looking at their website, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's 3 new organizations. Give me a break. Well, Teaching Tolerance is actually the Southern Poverty Law Center, and Welcoming Schools is actually human rights. Teaching outside the binary, they went straight to GLAD, which is like advertising and media. And then down here, this was a new one, gender inclusive biology. I figured Dr. Wright would appreciate this one, so I really looked into it. Okay, we'll look for that article and share it. So let's look at gender inclusive biology. Now, somebody had the question of, well, science is on my side. I'll just tell my kid that it's a lie. I'll just point out, the gametes. There's only 2. Yeah, they got you. They're already thinking ahead on this one. Deviant people usually are. Because they want to rewrite biology to support all students present and future. We must adapt existing biology teaching to grow gender-inclusive curriculum. It's right there, not making it up. How do all gender identities and sexual orientations fit into our understanding of science development and evolution? Can we create safe spaces in science? It's science. Just like, how can math be racist? How can science be unsafe? Oh, because it's the truth. But they're trying to change the truth here. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, who wrote this? Well, right here, Trans Educators Network, and I breathed a big sigh of relief when they admitted to only being 3 teachers. But 3 people can make themselves have a big voice. And they do, because look at this. The National Association of Biology Teachers, the National Science Teachers Association, and the Next Generation Science Standards are all gender inclusive. They've followed the AMA and the American Academy of Pediatrics. They're all on board with this stuff. So even if a science teacher wants to say, no, I'm going to actually teach the truth, I'm going to teach science, we've got these professional organizations that you're actually going against. This graphic from GLSEN talks about all the different classes that they are looking at. And then, of course, the LGBTQ plus caucus in tiny little letters, this National Education Association. On this website, you get the Gender Unicorn. That was mandatory training. 30 minutes up the road from here. 30 minutes. Mandatory training for teachers and administrators, at the end of which they had to rate their gayness. And then you had this gender identity pyramid, which is also being pushed on this website. And of course, all of these are in pretty bright colors for children. And you've seen some of these screenshots, but these are resources, videos for kids, intersex across the animal kingdom, the origin of gender. But here's the thing, you think it's not here, but have a look. What makes you a baby? 8th grade edition. Touch-based sex determination in slipper limpets. What the hell is a limpet? Down here, pigeonetics game. The guardian frogs of Borneo, the butterfly, the chimera butterfly, sexing skeletons, the biology of sex, gender, and the irreversible diversity of human biology. So they're trying to say that skeletons are now intersex. And the diversive reproductive strategies gallery walk. So, parents a year and a half ago took issue with this in the 1st grade. And we said, you know what? Before we knew any of all this stuff, all we did was 30 parents put in 1,200 hours to read every book in the Wit and Wisdom curriculum, and they flagged upon this one seahorse book in 1st grade. And as a parent, they're like, that doesn't smell right, doesn't look right, doesn't smell right, doesn't sound right, and you know it in your gut. Why? Because you're the parent, and that is your kid, and you have that connection with them, and you know more than any of these crazy people on the other end of the line that's pushing this stuff. You know. And you need to pay attention to that gut feeling because it was right on. And the left tried to meme us for seahorses, but the left can't meme, so it's not really a big deal. But in 1st grade, there's a whole lesson that focuses on the seahorse, and it focuses on the dad has the babies. And it focuses, you can see on that graphic, on various seahorse sexual positions. And again, this is for children that have not had that talk yet. and the parents knew this isn't right, and they made fun of us for it. But oh, look, slipper limpets. PFLAG. I got tired. This is a big website. But one thing I thought that was interesting about PFLAG, which was parents, family, and friends of lesbians and gays, is look at the money. There are multiple organizations on there that you patron. Why are they on there? Like, I mean, we knew Subaru, but you know, I think even Tractor Supply's on a different page. The UPS company is on a bunch of them. Walmart's on it twice. Hallmark Channel. There's a lot of money here and a lot of power that flows down. Take that to PFLAG, Franklin. It's right here. You know, like the PFLAG mission to me doesn't sound too bad, you know, on the surface. It's like, okay, parents, friends, and family of lesbians and gays. Cool, right on. But then their website pushes them towards the children's mutilation clinic at Vanderbilt and all the other woke ideology. Which brings us to Franklin Pride. We all know Franklin Pride. Thanks to them, we've had drag queen performances at historic Harlansdale Farm. They also have drag happy hour routinely at the Hyatt House in Cool Springs, and those are some screenshots of the videos that they posted online. Yeah, just talking about the great show, and then they're really proud of this prom incident that happened. I think it was 2 years, no, almost spring of 2022, wasn't it? Yeah. I don't know, it's all a blur. But they're really happy about it. And, you know, these kids got national exposure. Is that really healthy for a high schooler to hold them up as a thing to comment on? So Franklin Pride, again, they do their, for Colin and for Chris, Harlansdale, that's it right there. It's this beautiful, historic old horse barn, and many events get held there. Many family photos were taken there. And of course, there's pride flags and drag queens. And they featured Vag at the most recent one. And over here, they had, the Blair Bitch and various other drag queens. So is the drag agenda happening here? Yeah, it absolutely is. And if you don't turn a blind eye, it's here. It's all over Tennessee too, Chattanooga, Murfreesboro, Knoxville, but it's here. And it's marketed to children. That was a family-friendly event. So here's the complicated network, but guess who was a donor amongst many, including now the Democrat Party at the bottom, Williamson County Democratic Party. But of course, the Vanderbilt medical system helped to fund that event. Which brings us to Wilco Iris. So fear not, we're like down here, like right at the very bottom. You're almost done. Wilco Iris. So we have the Williamson Social Justice Alliance, and they felt the need to start Wilco Iris in addition to PFLAG Franklin, in addition to Franklin Pride, because in addition to the GSAs and prison clubs that are here, because I think they just wanted more of a youth arm. That's what it looks like to me. But it talks about the Teen Lounge by Wilco Iris with a drag tutorial, how to be a better drag queen. And they were encouraging their members to attend the drag happy hour put on by Franklin Pride. Here's another thing, though, to take note on their website. They are trying deliberately to get one of their students on every student council for every high school. And if you look, there's some social media posts. Join the Wilco Iris Student Leadership Council. They still need to cover these high schools. And then, join the Student Leadership Council. You can participate in social justice initiatives. But, we're only accepting applications from Fairview and Page High School because we filled all the others. So it's at work. And oh, by the way, this is a microcosm of what activists do on the outside once they graduate, right? That is how we have woke school boards, because they're the ones that care about these positions, and then they get in there and they wreak havoc. So you're training them early. More social posts by Wilco Iris. And the links page. Same usual suspects. You guys are probably catching on to all these logos popping up again and again and again and again. So is it here in Williamson County? Now I'm ready to answer your question. Yeah, there's a PRISM club and LGBTQ clubs in middle schools. There are pride flags at Bethesda Elementary. I guarantee you there are at pretty much every elementary. GSAs are prevalent. Preferred pronouns are being used by teachers and administrators. Last year in 2021 was the first time parents reported that their students were being asked their preferred pronouns. And nobody really pushed back. And now it's there, and you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. So organized efforts by Wilco Iris in all high schools. We do have woke school counselors. That's a whole other thing to pick at. The ASCA. Highly radicalized. It's not the guidance counselors of yore where they're going to help you figure out what college to go to or what vocational school. No, they are radicalizing kids in gender ideology, and that white piece of paper is a flyer for a Franklin High School counselor with the pronouns on the front. So we absolutely have that at work in Williamson County. The Gender Unicorn was just 30 minutes up the road, and basically we share a curriculum with Metro. So what else do we share with Metro? Whatever's up there is going to trickle down here, just like whatever's in California, New York is moving here. And there was a 5th grade teacher this school year, like 2 weeks into the year, that said, buckle up to her class, I'm from California, I'm a liberal from California, and you better get ready for what's coming. So the Vanderbilt's just up the road. Gender-bending books in the classrooms as young as kindergarten, that's been confirmed. And then pornographic gender-bending books in the library. And I have had plenty of local, like News Channel 5 and WSMV wanted to do interviews with me about book banning. And they were salivating because they were ready for me to just say the wrong thing and they could paint me as a book banner. Thankfully, I didn't walk into that trap. But I showed them. I'm like, you want to talk about the books? You want to see an excerpt? And at the end of the interview, I'll pull my phone out and be like, read this. There's a book called Push by Sapphire. It is in Williamson County. Now, genderqueer, Lawn Boy, Sumner just got rid of Lawn Boy. Genderqueer and Lawn Boy are not here, but we do have Push. And any reporter who read that off my phone did not dare paint me as a book banner. Because when we're talking about pornographic books, it is not old-fashioned pornography. Just like the adolescents that you had of old, porn, not that I'm an expert in it, apparently has changed because these books are dark, dark material. It's not man and a woman stuff. It is man on men. It is sex of men with minors. It is the rape. Push by Sapphire has the repeated rape of a 7-year-old daughter by her father. These are dark, dark pornographic books, and it's there. It's in Williamson County, and we're working on trying to get it out. And of course, family-friendly drag shows. So there you have it. I answered the question. And when you look at this diagram, it's missing a lot of lines. You know, this connects to that, and this connects to that, and this. And if I drew all the lines, it'd just be ridiculous. It'd just be laughable. So, you know, for the sake of simplicity, some aren't there. But the one line that I did include, that I did not fail to include, right, was, does it target the schools? Yeah. Even if I didn't tell you what I know on the previous slide, if you have that many entities and that much firepower and that much money all focused in on the school that your child attends, how can you think it's not there? There's no way it's not there. And of all those entities, the only one that's going to stand up to it and break that chain is you, the parent, or the grandparent, or the citizen advocate. And it's enough to make you just want to give up. It's overwhelming. I know the feeling. That's like, that laptop one, that's like me at 3 in the morning. So how can we help? So Moms for Liberty, we are a service organization. We are a nonprofit, and we're here to inform, equip, and empower parents. How can we do that? Well, it starts with the first one, informing. Information and knowledge is power. It is equipping you to just know. And I guarantee that you didn't know the extent of things that were here, right here at home. So how can we help? Well, as part of our Gender Ideology Month of November, at the close of this month, well, actually probably tomorrow, the Gender Ideology Toolkit will be live because this video will be posted in it. And that's where we begin the build of a Gender Ideology Toolkit. If you haven't visited our Critical Race Theory, Social Emotional Learning, and Wit and Wisdom, and SAVAS toolkits, check them out because they are massive. There is